Wolfe lowered his gaze to the drill in his hands, then to the recharging inscription laid out on the table beside him. Yeah, forging spell work was a crime. But the Coven patrols almost never came this deep into the lower levels, and the squads that did usually didn't bring real witches. Down here, people got robbed the old-fashioned way. Quiet. Quick. Forgotten. And Wolfe needed cash. Ever since the Magi War, the world belonged to the Witch Covens. They'd allied with the mundane armies, hunted down every Magi strong enough to spark even a basic cantrip, and wiped them out. After the dust and radiation settled, the Covens didn't just survive. They inherited everything. To be fair, life wasn't all bad. Magic had been fused with technology until it felt like the future people used to dream about. Enchanted devices. Mana-powered infrastructure. Clean energy that didn't choke the sky. But it came with a price that never showed up in the advertisements. Only those with witch blood could activate enchantments. Only they could top up spell work when the initial charge ran dry. They liked it that way. You could hire a witch to recharge your gear, sure, if you could pay. Later they introduced mana crystals anyone could use, making magic accessible. Accessible, as long as you bought it from them. Over time, mana replaced the entire old power grid inside the fortress cities. Renewable, clean, and most importantly, hoardable. The wealthy could literally stack mana in vaults and guarantee their access to power even without a witch nearby. Still, no matter how rich you got, without a noble bloodline you couldn't create crystals. You could only purchase them. Which meant you could never be more than wealthy. The witches were the real aristocracy. A century after the war, the recovering governments made it law. Resistance happened, of course, but it never lasted. Not when the Coven Queens could drain a city's mana grid on a whim and throw millions back into darkness until they begged forgiveness. That was how the dream of equality died long before Wolfe was born. And that monopoly was exactly what Wolfe planned to exploit. Magical tools were expensive but practical. The inscription he'd copied would keep a power tool charged for a month off a single unit of mana from a crystal. A unit cost 10 credits. Cheap. The inscription itself? 300. If Wolfe could carve a convincing copy onto this pawnshop drill, clean it up, and resell it as enchanted, he could walk away with 200 credits profit after the shop's cut. Nobody would discover the fake until the battery died and they tried to recharge it. And by then Wolfe would be long gone. The only catch was the drill was dead right now. The pawn shop owner was too stingy to even recharge a battery pack from the wall. Wolfe set the template beside the drill and got to work. He traced the lines carefully into the battery casing, carving each curve and angle like his life depended on it. When the grooves were done, he filled them with silver paint. It should have been real silver, mixed with rare catalysts and proper reagents, the kind only witch-blooded families could afford. Even if Wolfe had witch blood, he wasn't a noble daughter trained to use magic. He was a delivery runner with a drill and a bad plan. He added the final symbols. Pain stabbed through his hand, sharp and immediate, like he'd grabbed a live wire. Damn it. Wolfe hissed, shaking his fingers. I checked it was discharged. It shouldn't shock me even if I carved too deep. He stared at the battery pack, suddenly nervous. If he'd damaged it, the whole hustle was worthless. Then the battery indicator lights flickered. 1%. 2. 3. Wolfe froze. The charge climbed steadily, like the pack had been plugged into a real mana grid. No, that wasn't possible. Everyone in the lower city knew someone who'd gotten scammed with forged magical goods. If drawing a circle was all it took, the Covens would have lost control centuries ago. Every kid with a pen would be turning junk into enchanted gear. Wolfe swallowed and pulled the trigger. The drill spun to life, smooth and strong, running like it had a brand new full charge. For a moment he just stood there, listening to the whir, his thoughts sprinting. It worked. It actually worked. His mouth went dry. If this is real, he whispered, half to himself, then I can sell anywhere. Even the high-end shops. Nobody can call it fake if it functions. A rumor from his neighborhood surfaced, one he'd always laughed at. That the Noxus family had Magi blood. That their current head, Wolfe's distant relative, the man Wolfe politely called Uncle, could kill with a touch. Wolfe had always dismissed it as myth. He'd seen the man shoot a would-be assassin like anyone else. But now, Wolfe wasn't so sure. And that was the problem. There were no safe outcomes to testing the truth. If the rumor was false, he'd be humiliated for spreading it and punished for embarrassing the family. If it was true, then his quiet life ended the second anyone noticed and reported him. Coven law didn't just punish rogue magic. It executed men who showed affinity for it. Sometimes it executed witches too, if they practiced outside the coven. Magic users who weren't covens were supposed to be extinct. If Wolfe proved he could really do this, the Noxus family wouldn't protect him out of love. They'd protect him out of fear. Fear that rivals would capture him, weaponize him, and rip the secret out of his bones. A real magic user was too valuable to exist out in the open. So Wolfe did what he always did. He made a plan. He'd go to the pawn shop and play it smart. Claim he was leaving construction work, upgrading his life. He was old enough now for the story to stick, and the Noxus name carried weight. The family tattoo on his arm would sell it. He'd enchant 3 more batteries if he could repeat the effect. Then sell 2 complete tool sets, each with a spare battery. That was an easy 1,000 credits in profit. A scam he could only run once in 2 separate territories before people connected the dots. But Wolfe wasn't thinking about the money anymore. He was thinking about what this meant. The world wasn't terrible for someone under a strong crime family's shadow. The Noxus controlled territory on the lower floors. It was dangerous, but it was status. People dreamed of that life. Still, power was power. And Wolfe had just touched something that didn't belong to him. He tried to remember his old history lessons. The Magi War had scarred the planet so badly that humanity still lived inside fortress cities, sheltered from poisoned air and lingering fallout. The witches specialized in enchantments, potions, nature magic. The Magi had been elemental monsters. Details were scrubbed from history to stop anyone from copying them, but everyone knew one fact: an entire portion of a continent had been swallowed by the sea when Earth magic shifted the plates themselves. That was when the mundane armies responded with nuclear fire. None of it told Wolfe what to do next. But it sparked a thought that made his pulse jump. If he could recharge batteries, could he recharge mana crystals too? Crystals weren't just fuel. They were currency. Their value was tied to their charge. Wolfe stared at the drill, at the glowing battery indicator, and a slow smile crept across his face. If this was real, then maybe he wasn't just holding a tool. Maybe he was holding a printing press for money. Empty mana crystals were basically trash. Once they ran dry, most people tossed them into recycling bins for a small refund. Wolfe had seen the collection boxes all over Noxus territory, overflowing most days. That meant endless test material. He could grab handfuls, experiment in private, and if something went wrong, nobody would miss a worthless crystal. With that plan locked in, he moved on to the rest of the batteries he'd bought. This time he was careful. Not, I think this looks right, careful. The kind of careful where you breathe only when the line is finished. He didn't understand what made the magic work, so he focused on the only things he could control: clean cuts, perfect circles, and no mistakes. The second battery sparked to life the same way the first had, with a sharp shock that ran through his hand. And that's when it clicked. The circle wasn't just spell art. It was a circuit. He was carving pathways, filling them with conductive paint, and the moment the pattern closed, energy surged through the tool, and through him. The stylus handle was metal. The paint was metallic. The first pulse was dumping charge through the easiest route available. Him. Wolfe cursed under his breath, but he didn't change the process. If the shock was part of what started the inscription, messing with it could ruin everything. He finished the last 2 batteries the same way, flinching at the sting, then set to work on the boring part, cleaning and repairing the tools until they looked gently used instead of rescued from a junk pile. When he was satisfied, he packed 1 set of tools and 2 batteries into his backpack. Now came the risky part. The shops that paid real money were higher up. Getting there meant crossing territory. His family operated on one floor, and he wasn't stupid enough to sell forged goods to neighbors who might recognize his face, then complain to the wrong person when something went wrong. He'd have to go where nobody knew him. Wolfe wasn't helpless. His broken nose and scarred knuckles were proof he'd lived in the lower floors long enough to learn how to handle problems. He wasn't huge, but he was solid, and the hard look in his gray eyes didn't match his age. He checked his electric delivery bike, freshly charged, ready to climb ramps and chew distance. Most of the ride would be easy. A few zones wouldn't be. Some families didn't like lower floor trash passing through their streets. That was the risk. But it also meant safety later. If the tools ever caused trouble, nobody would connect them back to Noxus territory. And he couldn't bring witch attention down on his uncle. So Wolfe tightened his backpack straps and rolled out. "Hey, Wolfe," the enforcer at the ramp called as Wolfe cruised up. "Where are you heading today?" "Upper floors," Wolfe replied easily. "Delivery run. You know how it is." The man clapped him on the shoulder, friendly but serious. "Be careful up there. Family can't cover you outside our turf. But I'll be right here at the border if you need to come back fast." Wolfe nodded. "Hopefully I won't need it. But I know the signal." He pedaled up the ramp and out. Guards on the next floor waved him through when they saw the Noxus markings and the delivery setup. Wolfe kept his pace steady, blending into traffic. Cars were rare down here. Most roads were packed with electric bikes, mana-powered delivery trucks, and the occasional taxi. Overhead, enchanted streetlights cast a soft yellow glow. People said it mimicked sunlight, but Wolfe had never left the fortress to know what real sunlight even looked like. He kept his route tight. Fewer crossings, fewer eyes. The Coven watched everything, and going too far from home was the kind of small detail that became suspicious fast. There weren't laws stopping travel between most floors. But there didn't need to be. The threat of being noticed was enough. Wolfe crossed floor after floor, noting colors and signs, filing them away in case he needed a story later. Coral tones here. Blues and whites there. Different paint, same hunger. His luck held. No traffic jams. No random stops. No one asking questions. Finally, he reached the area he wanted, not truly upper floors, but a district that served them. Better money, tighter security, and most importantly, real Coven police instead of family muscle. Riding past them felt like biking through a line of knives. He kept his head down and his speed normal. Then he saw the sign. Council Construction Materials. A reputable used tool dealer. Known for quality and strict inspection. Wolfe had picked it for one reason. The owner had done business with Noxus before. Wolfe didn't want to pull the family name unless he had to, but it was insurance. If things got tense, affiliation could turn into a shield. He parked his bike in the rack out front and walked in like he belonged there. Confidence got you past more doors than honesty ever did. The greeter glanced at his nose, his work-worn clothes, his posture, then decided he was the correct kind of customer. "Welcome to Council Construction," she said with a practiced smile. "How can we help you?" Wolfe nodded politely. "I picked up delivery work. I'm selling my tools to upgrade my ride." "Moving up," she said, impressed. "Delivery tips are great, I hear." "I could never do it." She waved someone over. "This is Ron," she said. "One of our appraisers. He'll get you a fair price." Ron wore a red shirt and a bored expression that sharpened when he saw what Wolfe carried. Wolfe offered a hand. "Call me Paul. These were my father's. I'm switching jobs, so I'm selling the power tools. Keeping a few, though." "Insurance." Ron smirked. "Smart. Never sell all your old man's tools." He led Wolfe to a side counter. Wolfe unpacked 8 tools and the 2 batteries. "Both batteries have working inscriptions," Wolfe said quickly. "Plenty of charge left." Ron's eyebrows lifted. "That's considerate. Charging and verification costs money." He called over their on-staff witch. Wolfe's stomach tightened. This was the moment. If she could tell the inscriptions weren't Coven-made, he was finished. The witch, an older woman with a thick build and tired eyes, arrived already annoyed. "You didn't even test before calling me?" she snapped. Ron lowered his gaze. "Sorry, ma'am. I'll do it now." He slotted a battery into the tester. A light above the bench flared, draining power fast. Wolfe forced himself to breathe. At 50%, Ron stopped the test and turned the display so everyone could see. Then he checked the voltage with a meter, watching it climb exactly as it should. Ron nodded, genuinely satisfied. The witch leaned in, frowning. Then her expression shifted to interest. "Boy," she said slowly, "where did you get that battery?" "It was my father's," Wolfe said, shrugging. "No idea where he bought it." She studied him for a beat, then softened a fraction. "Sorry for your loss. He paid good money. That charging rate is better than average." Wolfe didn't know the grading system well, but the relief hit him like fresh air. She continued, almost grudgingly approving. "That's a solid D, close to C." Then she waved a hand at Ron like he was wasting her time. "Test the other one." The second battery drained faster, but its recharge curve looked strong. The witch didn't react negatively. She scribbled a slip and handed it to Ron. "1D plus 1D, she said. "Different where?" "Your father bought them at different times." Wolfe nodded like he understood. He couldn't argue quality on used goods anyway. Ron did quick math. 200 for the worn one. 250 for the better pack. 400 for the tools. Wolfe kept his face calm, even though his pulse jumped. "That's better than I expected," he said, extending his hand. "Deal." Ron shook it. And Wolfe immediately started thinking about the exit. Because the money was good. The inspection passed. Now all he needed to do was leave before anyone asked him for ID.
Hey everyone, welcome to our channel, and thank you for your support. If there's a favorite novel on the channel and you want the next part, you're just one step away. Become a Patreon member and I can make it depending on your tier. Thank you for your attention.
With his deal done, Wolfe quickly made his way back home, not intending to stop until he reached the Noxus family's territory. He got more than a few angry shouts as he raced through the streets, but that was a normal part of every day for a delivery rider. And he simply ignored them as he always did as he raced through the streets well beyond the 30 kilometers an hour speed limit imposed on stock vehicles. "So, how did it go?" "Make some money," the border guard at the ramp to his home floor asked as Wolfe approached in the closest lane of traffic. "It was a good day. I should be able to go an entire week without a side hustle." Wolfe laughed, making the pedestrians around them shake their heads. Nobody went an entire week in the city without at least trying to make a little something on the side. It was just common sense that you could never get ahead with only a legitimate job. The guard gave him the thumbs up as congratulations, and Wolfe darted back out into traffic, dodging the slower-moving cycles and the pedestrians crossing the road wherever they pleased. Making his way through the cookie-cutter apartment blocks of his floor's residential area, Wolfe kept his pace slow enough not to attract an unusual level of attention while keeping his eyes open for danger. Normally, none of the denizens of these cinder-block-lined alleys would bother him, but you could never be too safe, and he wasn't totally without personal enemies. He had stepped on more than a few toes to get where he was, and rival couriers would often look for an excuse to mess with strangers, at least until he got further back into Noxus family territory. In under 15 minutes, his own apartment building came into sight, and Wolfe made his way back to his one-bedroom apartment, a boring place with tan walls and synthetic wood floors. He could afford better, but Wolfe had dreams of moving up in life by more than he could right now, so he was saving all the money he could until he could buy a home instead of renting like his parents did all their life. His uncle Ivan, head of the Noxus family, was very wealthy but only an uncle in name. Wolfe's branch of the family was many generations removed and had previously lived down on the lowest floors of the city, where the very poorest and most desperate citizens congregated and struggled to get away from. The relationship was enough to land him a job and a loan when he was in a tight spot after his parents' death, but that was about as far as it went. As the witches said, filth settles to the bottom, and the lower levels were not a great place to live. But they were home until Wolfe came to his uncle's territory and saw how much better things could be if someone took charge where the Coven didn't care to. Looking back on his childhood now, Wolfe had often wondered how things had gotten so bad in the lower levels, but he could see no obvious reason for their condition. It was simply how things were. He settled in the one large recliner that made up what passed for his living room and took out the few empty mana crystals he had not tossed in the recycling. Wolfe had no idea how to recharge them, but the inscriptions had gone smoothly enough, so he had high hopes that he could do this as well. With the empty crystals set on the table in front of him, Wolfe began to focus on the feeling of energy in his fingertips that he got when he inscribed the circles on the battery packs. He could clearly recall the feeling and was certain that it would work to create the circle again, but it had no effect on the crystal. He had been handling these all his life. Surely if it were that easy, he would have discovered it by accident before age 18. What kid hasn't held one of these crystals and wished they had the power of the witches to create wealth for themselves out of thin air? Sure, there were laws against doing exactly that to keep the commoner witches in line. But to the practical mind of Wolfe, who rarely had any dealings with them, it seemed like a minor thing that nobody would notice unless you went overboard. He didn't and couldn't know that these crystals had a specific energy signature to them. If a witch touched one, she could tell who made the crystal itself and if the energy inside was from the same person. There was a chance that it could have been made and filled by a witch she was unfamiliar with, but the mismatch would immediately alert the coven that someone had been refilling mana crystals without authorization. In that way, the stored energy was strictly regulated, with each witch being given a certain allowance to create monthly, based on their rank. In theory, an illegally filled crystal could be passed around or used without issue, but businesses would return the ones they didn't need to immediately use to the bank every night, where the crystals would be verified and credits issued. The city, as all the residents called their megalithic home, housed over 20 million human beings, of which fewer than 10,000 were witches. Meeting one in person at the shop really was a surprise, and not in a good way, at least not for Wolfe, who was as far from a fanboy of the rulers of their society as could possibly exist. Sure, the young ones were cute, but there were plenty of good-looking women in the city without the attitude that came with a noble upbringing. The commoner witches who would take such a position, even part-time, made up 2/3 of that 10,000 witch number and were the very weakest of their covens, but still, they were a rare sight for someone like Wolfe. Something like seeing a celebrity or a CEO. A down-on-their-luck, lesser-known one, but still, a rare occurrence on his level of the city. Once he was comfortable, Wolfe opened the browser on his computer to look up videos relating to the crystals. There should be something to be found on the network. Even a short documentary about them would help him in his efforts to recharge the ones he had. The first one he found was about the colors of the crystals. They were related to the specialty of the witch that made them, as each had their own technique for growing mana crystals. The empty ones Wolfe had were blue, and the video said that they were grown in water, along with a secret assortment of reagents, then fed energy by the coven member to charge them. It was portrayed as a very dangerous and draining activity, with the risk and effort both contributing to the stored mana's worth. Still, somehow Wolfe suspected that the reality was much more mundane. It did give him an idea, though. Like everyone else who collected payments daily, he had a crystal testing pad, which would tell him the remaining energy content and, therefore, the value. So Wolfe checked the first of his empty crystals, making sure he hadn't missed a few stored credits. It was verified fully drained, so Wolfe washed it clean and put it in his favorite soup pot with some water, then turned up the stove a little so that the water wasn't icy cold. Getting them wet didn't do anything, but he hoped that if he put his hand in the pot with the crystal and tried the energy to his fingertip thing again, he might have some luck in getting the charge to transfer. Focusing on himself, Wolfe could feel a bit of energy in his chest, right near his heart. Extending that feeling to his hand made the water glow for a brief moment, then fade away. Hell yeah, this is it, I'm sure of it. Wolfe cheered out loud to the empty room. But when he tried again, it was much harder and Wolfe began to feel exhausted almost immediately. All he could think of while his eyes drooped and sleep threatened to overcome him was to turn the stove off, nap, and try again tomorrow. Wolfe was so tired he didn't even stop to check how much he had managed to get the crystal to absorb or even if the experiment had worked at all. When he fell asleep, Wolfe was still wondering if he had just burned himself out, making a pot of water glow. When Wolfe woke up a few hours later, he felt much better. All of the exhaustion had vanished as if it had never existed, and he was ready to see his progress. He rolled out of bed, straightened the clothes that he fell asleep wearing, and headed for the kitchen. Wolfe slowly approached the stove and peered into the pot, praying that his efforts last night had paid off. The dull blue crystal lay right where he left it, in the bottom of the soup pot, just waiting to be fished out and dried off so it could be tested. As far as Wolfe knew, a fully charged crystal and an empty one looked exactly the same, which is why the crystal testing pads were necessary. Wolfe tried to calm his shaking hands as he moved the small storage device from the pot to the testing pad, then closed his eyes and pressed the power button. "Please, whoever is listening, let this have worked," he muttered before opening his eyes and looking at the reading. 30 units. That was 300 credits, or if you looked at it another way, 2 entire months' power bill. He could use this crystal right now to charge the storage bank in the basement of his building and not need to pay an energy bill this month or next. That was a big thing to Wolfe. Power was expensive, especially for a courier who needed to recharge his bike every day. So, Wolfe set the crystal aside and set another empty on the testing pad. Once he verified that it was indeed at 0, he washed the crystal and placed it in the pot. It was what he did last time, and he didn't know if a dirty crystal made a difference, so he would continue to wash them. Innovation wasn't even in his thought process. He had found a way that somewhat worked, and he wasn't about to mess it up by trying new things until his immediate problems were solved. This time he focused more on making a slow but steady flow from himself into the pot and watched as the blue light swirled around the crystal. Once he started feeling woozy, Wolfe stopped the process and sat down to recover, focusing on his breathing the same as he did after a hard trip on the bike. That seemed to help, and in only 10 minutes, he was ready to get up and check the pot. It looked the same as before, and the blue light had faded to nothing, leaving just the crystal in the soup pot. If he was going to keep doing this, he needed to get something more dignified. Plus, that was his only pot, and he was hungry. Carefully placing the freshly charged crystal on the mat, Wolfe hit the power button again and waited patiently for the testing to come up. 30 units. The same result as before, so that must be the extent of his abilities in one attempt. If he could do that one more time, he would have his entire month's rent and power bill before lunch. But the question was, how should he convert these units to credits to pay the landlord? The power bill could be paid in units, but the rent could not. The cranky old property owner only took credits. Wolfe wasn't brave enough to cash them at a bank, in case they could be traced back to him, but he did have a few leads. Businesses that would take units at a discount to power their factory and not ask how you got them. Credits were digital and hard to steal, but crystals were a physical object and subject to robbery. That made them a lucrative target, the equivalent of the legendary days before the war when credits were physical coins and larger denominations were on paper notes called cash. The companies only gave you half price, though, and his rent was 500 credits. He had enough to pay the bills already after trading off the power tools, but the bills never really ended. They just kept showing up no matter how often you paid them off. But once he had enough, he could buy a unit of his own and use these crystals to keep it powered without buying from the grid. Wolfe could imagine the easy life already. But first, he needed to work on his skills and increase the amount he could charge a crystal daily. When they were distributed, a full crystal was 100 units, but that was the most suspicious way to use a single crystal. Nobody ever had a full crystal on them in the city. At least not more than an hour after payday. Even if you hadn't purchased anything with it, you would charge your devices and home energy storage first, just so that you didn't have that many units on you when you went shopping. Since the store's withdrawal machines showed the current balance to anyone who happened to be nearby. After a bit more rest, Wolfe moved the second crystal back to the pot and prepared his mind to try again. The stress seemed to be entirely mental, with a mild burning in his chest where the energy seemed to originate. Both of those issues were tolerable to Wolfe in the name of wealth and progress, so he began the recharging attempt again. This time he tried to add energy as slowly as he could, watching the crystal absorb it as he went instead of letting it light up the water. At first, that seemed less stressful on his body, but the end result was the same: mental exhaustion and a headache. Instead of sleeping, Wolfe tried to mediate. The old folk insisted that it was the best way to clear your mind and that there were many other benefits that Wolfe had never experienced, but today was different. He wasn't sleepy, just drained from spell casting. If you could call this a spell, that is. Wolfe focused on his breathing and the burning feeling in his chest, trying to calm it down. The meditation was quick to relieve the burning, and after a few minutes, Wolfe could feel the energy begin flowing into his body. It was soothing, like a mint balm cooling his body, and Wolfe was feeling better than he ever had before. All of the fatigue and old aches from years as a delivery rider were fading as he meditated. Still, more importantly, that spot of energy in the middle of his chest began to feel like a pouch, holding energy that Wolfe was certain he could use later. Wolfe continued meditating until the pouch of what he could only assume was mana in his chest felt full and wouldn't hold anymore. The action seemed natural, as if he had always known what to do on an instinctive level and only had to try it once to awaken the memories. It was an incredible feeling, like he was whole and complete for the first time in his life, but with a hint of weakness, like a newborn who had just taken its first breath. The process had taken much longer than expected, and his watch showed it was already afternoon. He really had to get to work now, as he hadn't planned on skipping his courier job entirely, just taking the morning to rest after a good haul yesterday. The courier company was one of the best places on this level to work, and skipping a full day without notice was a great way to get yourself fired. Wolfe turned his phone on and checked the courier app for nearby deliveries. There was a good order from just down the street going to the Noxus main house that nobody had picked up yet, so Wolfe quickly accepted it and grabbed the 2 crystals plus his bike on his way out. Pushing himself as hard as he could to make up lost time, Wolfe noticed that his legs seemed just a bit stronger today, and he wasn't getting tired as fast as usual. The meditation had really helped, he decided as he kept pedaling as hard as he could, testing his limits. A faster courier made more money, and Wolfe was one of the best already. The order was ready and waiting when he arrived at the restaurant, but it was still steaming, so he wasn't too far off the ready time. Must be a busy day today. It's not often that we wait that long for a confirmation. The cashier greeted Wolfe as he jogged in with his courier bag. Yeah, I started late today, and I was pretty shocked to see you with an active order. No worries though, I will get it there on time. Who is the contact? Wolfe replied, double-checking that the order was correct. Butler James. Same as usual. He's expecting it in 12 minutes. The cashier told him as Wolfe loaded his bag and jogged back out. He locked the bag to the back rack on his electric bicycle and raced out into traffic, overtaking most of the slower-moving vehicles. The speed limit in the city was only 30 kilometers an hour, and most vehicles held to that in order to save energy, but not Wolfe. That was why he used a modified electric bike with the speed limiter disabled and not a moped. He could add his own efforts to increase his speed and not use up the battery. At his usual speed, the main house was 15 minutes away, but Wolfe was practically flying today as he wove through the lunchtime crowd. Traffic control always looked the other way for couriers speeding, so he didn't slow down at all, except when he reached a red light. Even then, he ducked around the line of traffic using the oncoming lanes so he could get to the front and sped off the moment the lights changed. After only 9 minutes, he was at the gates to the Noxus main house, where an unexpected sight greeted him. It was not Butler James that came to collect the order, but Uncle Ivan himself. Young Wolfe, it is good to see you again. Take some time off and come inside. There is a small family gathering today, and you should meet some of the others now that you have turned 18. It is good you came today. It saves me having to look for you to introduce you to the family. Uncle Ivan was a huge and intimidating man, broad in the shoulder and over 2 meters tall, with salt and pepper hair that had begun to show his age. Wolfe unlocked the delivery bag, since the butler wasn't there with the tray to collect the order, and reached out his hand to greet the family patriarch with the family's unique handshake. The moment their hands touched, a spark of energy flowed between them, and Uncle Ivan's eyes opened wide in shock. It seems that we have a lot to talk about. Don't leave after dinner, and keep your gloves on when you are greeting anyone but the elders. The patriarch whispered, then led Wolfe inside the immaculate white plantation-style house. Wolfe followed the patriarch of his family into the dining room, where 40 or more men, all sharing the same dark hair as Wolfe had and similar facial features, had gathered. "Don't worry about the ladies. They retire to the sitting room until dinner, so we don't bore them to death with talk of work." One of the older men welcomed Wolfe to the room. Butler James quickly collected the delivery bag and gave Wolfe a wink and a tip, the same as their usual routine. The takeout would be for the children, since they probably wouldn't truly appreciate the spiced sausages and cabbage that Wolfe could smell cooking in the kitchen. Until very recently, Wolfe himself had been with them on the rare occasion that he was here for the monthly gathering, eating restaurant food in the small side room and socializing with the other youngsters. This would be his first monthly dinner in the adults' dining hall, and he had completely forgotten about it. Not that he had gotten an invitation or a reminder. The Noxus family didn't do that. You were either here for the dinner or weren't, and it only mattered if you were a topic of conversation in a negative way. Everyone had jobs and lives outside the house, other than a select few, and Uncle Ivan didn't judge based on attendance. "Roman, you know Wolfe, yes? He has just turned 18 and joined the family properly." Uncle Ivan informed the offer man who had spoken earlier. "Is that so? Very good, very good." Roman replied with a smile, then removed his glove to shake Wolfe's hand. The moment their bare skin touched, that same feeling of energy passed between them, making the old man look even more pleased before he schooled his face back to neutrality and put his glove back on. Wolfe took that as his cue and slid his riding gloves back on his hands. He felt a bit strange doing it, but he noticed that he wasn't alone. Though they were soft leather gloves, expensive and comfortable, almost all the better-dressed men in the room wore gloves. If he hadn't known about his ability to use magic, Wolfe would have simply assumed it was a preference of the senior family members. But now, Wolfe had just as many things to ask Uncle Ivan about as the old man had to ask him. As they mingled with the family, Ivan and Roman stayed close to Wolfe's side, introducing him to the various important members of the family, since the only adult other than Uncle Ivan that he already knew well was Johnny, his boss at the courier company. His usually loud and crude boss was quite polite and subdued in the face of the two elders, and Wolfe noticed that he was one of the few wealthy men who weren't wearing gloves, despite his age and the respect he got from the others. "You know Johnny, yes? He married Roman's daughter." "June," Uncle Ivan told Wolfe with a note of approval in his voice. "Indeed I do. I have been a courier at his company for a number of years now," Wolfe informed the two older men. "Not a bad start. Couriers build a lot of muscle that will come in useful later in life, especially a life like ours. But we can talk about fitness routines after dinner. It should be time for the ladies to return soon, and we can eat." Roman commended him. "Come sit by me so I can introduce you to everyone," Uncle Ivan instructed Wolfe, cutting off their conversation without any hint of emotion on his face or in his voice. This was his business face, getting ready to flex his position as family head in front of the assembled guests. Wolfe was aware that the seat by the patriarch was an honor, but the look on Johnny's face said he underestimated just how much of an honor it was. The courier company boss was almost green with envy, for in all the years since he had married into the family, he had never once been seated next to the patriarch. Still, the boy who worked for him got the honor the first time he attended dinner after his 18th birthday. Wolfe met a few of the ladies on his way to the head of the table, where he was seated between Ivan and Roman in clear sight of anyone who looked toward the patriarch. There was a young woman beside Roman, next to Johnny, which must make her June, Roman's daughter, but for the most part, Wolfe had already forgotten the other adults' names and their relation to the family. "Welcome again, Noxus family. It is good to see so many of you could come this month, for we have a special event today. Wolfe has just recently turned 18, and after some training, we have high hopes that he will be taking his place in the main family. Please treat him well and make him feel at home as the youngest of your peers." Ivan greeted the assembled guests. Wolfe could see a few jealous looks at the news, all from men without gloves, which Wolfe had just now realized were the mark of the main family's men, the ones who could at least feel mana. One look among the crowd was very different from the others, and certainly not at all like the jealous ones he was getting from the men. A woman in a high-necked blouse that emphasized her neck and made her chubby cheeks look even larger than they should be was giving him a hungry look that made Wolf's skin crawl. Not lust, though it was similar. The look on her face was pure greed, like he was a prize to be claimed. She was seated with an older woman who must be her mother and a man in an expensive suit who had arrived just in time for dinner. There was a much smaller woman beside him, one Wolfe would have called a teen girl had she not been here at the adults' table. That one stared directly at her plate, but Wolfe could see she was listening to the conversation. He hoped she learned some courage soon. The Noxus family was no place for the cowardly. I see you noticed Melody and her sister. Melody finished her time at the Witches' Academy last year. Unfortunately, she didn't manage to pass her first year to be recognized as a competent witch and gain the benefits, but there is a good chance that her children could activate the gene. Roman introduced the pudgy-faced young woman with a hint of pride. When witches had children with non-witches, the offspring usually had weaker magic until they eventually weren't witches at all. Melody was one of those cases, but there was always a chance that a prodigy could be born of her and her future husband and catapult the family into nobility. That possibility alone would make her a highly desirable bachelorette to advancement-minded young men, and it was clear from her haughty demeanor that she knew it. Wolfe nodded politely, then looked to the younger sister, who had raised her head enough to look at him for a moment. "It is a pleasure to meet you both. I don't believe I caught the other sister's name," Wolfe told them. "This is Cassandra, who prefers to go by Cassie. She doesn't speak much, but she will be headed for training this semester as well." Her father answered on her behalf, giving the silent daughter a gentle look. "Since the two training academies share a campus, perhaps you can keep an eye out for her. I will give you the details after dinner," Uncle Ivan announced, causing all eyes in the room to turn to Wolfe. But the man in question didn't have a single clue what was going on yet. Other than some altered videos of witch idols, he had never taken any interest in knowing about the lives and training of the nobility. Until today, he hadn't been overly concerned with the Noxus family's traditions for their core members either. What he did know was that Uncle Ivan was going to tell him something after dinner, and the family's training must be part of it. Melody looked more than a little sour at the news that Wolfe and Cassie were going to be trained together, but Wolfe couldn't see what sort of training would have the two of them paired up in any meaningful way. He knew that the Noxus family men were trained to fight at various academies. That was no secret. Every crime family sent their youth out to be trained if they seemed promising enough to join the family business. He had learned today that many of the Noxus elders had an affinity for mana, but unless everything he knew about the Magi being totally exterminated during the Great War was a lie, they couldn't actually use magic. More importantly, it sounded like Cassie was going to be trying to challenge the witch proficiency tests, and that certainly had nothing to do with him, as male witches couldn't use magic either. The dinner passed quickly, with everyone making small talk to catch up on the month's news, and the end of the meal came much too suddenly when Uncle Ivan stood up from his chair and motioned for Wolfe and Roman to follow him out of the dining room. The guests around the table all stood to bow as he left, then returned to their desserts and gossip, much more at ease now that the head of the family was gone. Uncle Ivan led them to his personal study, then activated the white noise filter and locked the door, soundproofing the room to protect against any attempts at eavesdropping. "What I need to tell you should not go beyond this room. In all the centuries that the Noxus family has been in the city, working to regain what we lost during the war, only 2 men have been born with a strong enough Magi bloodline to gather mana. The first was me. The second, I suspect, is you." Wolfe paused in shock at that announcement. "You can use mana too?" Uncle Ivan nodded solemnly. "That's why we cover our hands. Anyone with an active witch or Magi bloodline can feel the strength of the mana in you through contact. That means every failed witch, every member of rival families, and every female coven security officer. Everyone who could be a threat to your safety and livelihood is likely to be able to tell that you have a much higher than usual affinity for mana. If they find out you can actually use it, death is likely to be the better of the options you will be left with. If you are going to progress, you need to train. I was caught and had my potential tested by the witches at an early age. I hid my ability to use mana from them, and I was never strong, but even with their suspicion of my slight abilities, I have been under constant surveillance my whole life. That's also why the women of the family were so interested in you. The Coven's stronger witches keep a guardian, a sworn bodyguard of sorts that never leaves their side, or a humanoid familiar with them that they can use as a mana battery. Most of them are there for brute force or their innate mana, but if they could find a man with enough Magi heritage to gather a bit of mana on his own, he could constantly stream it to a witch and greatly increase her capabilities. Magi can store mana within themselves, but witches can't. They build up an aura that lets them draw mana more quickly instead. They have learned to store energy in objects like the mana crystals, but if they are disarmed, they are in a bad spot since gathering the mana for a spell takes a few seconds. Having a familiar that is strong enough to keep up with the demand cuts that time in half. That's why the Guardians exist, to cover them until they can cast their spells. Don't think that they're weak, though. Their spells are incredibly strong. They just aren't as fast as the Magi were said to have been. If you go to the Guardian Academy for a year, they will teach you about spells, so you can defend a witch against them. Use that knowledge to better yourself. It's a chance I didn't get because they caught on to my abilities too early, and I was forced to flee until I was too old for them to want me as a guardian anymore. After a year, if you haven't been chosen to accept a contract with a witch, they will expel you from the program, and you can return here to the family, where we will make sure you are well provided for. If you do find a witch you like, that's your choice. Remember, the bond is for life, and they won't let you go if they realize how powerful you are. Wolfe listened quietly through the entire speech, taking in the new information about the benefits to a witch of having a magic user as a guardian and what that could mean for him. There were some definite upsides, like a whole school full of sexy witches in their school uniforms. The uniforms were a legendary tier cosplay among the youth of the lower levels, so the real thing had to be better. Then there was the knowledge he could gain. He already knew that someone like him could use at least basic magical abilities without reagents, so he could take in a lot of what he needed to know just by proximity. But the risks were equally high. Being found out could lead to a life as nothing more than a mana battery for some snobby and power-hungry noble witch. Once that happened, it was all over for him. Rumors said that the witches could track their guardian anywhere and see through their eyes. For that reason, kids in the lower levels hid from the guardians, and nobody but the witches knew if that was all that they could do. When you said that Cassie was going for training, you meant that she might have the potential to be an actual witch, right? Wolfe asked. She almost certainly does. The Noxus family has been around since before the war, which is why our bloodline is blended, and our daughters have the chance to be witches. That is also how we survived the culling at the end of the war, by relying on the witches in our family to keep the remnants of the Magi bloodline going. All the men who could use mana, or who could even strongly sense it, were killed, but the daughters who survived and didn't show enough potential to become witch nobles reformed the family and quietly started seeking matches that would rebuild our heritage. I am old already, so her memory has faded among the younger generation, but my mother ruled the family for 60 years. Like the others from families who weren't selecting marriage partners with as pure of a witch heritage as possible, her ability had faded from what witches were once capable of. However, she still had enough magic to pass the academy's first year before being expelled for low performance and becoming a commoner witch. Both you and Cassie will be going to the academy. Her as a coven applicant, you as a squire. Find her an appropriate guardian if you can, as I believe she has it in her to pass the first tests. Once she finishes the first year, she will be a commoner witch, and our family territory will be recognized by the nobles again. It will be a great thing for the Noxus family. If she can go further, she will become my successor, even if I have to kill her cow of a sister to keep her safe. There was the ruthless Uncle Ivan, the family head that everyone knew best. Nothing was out of bounds if it was for the betterment of the family. Nothing at all. Wolfe knew that was why Uncle Ivan was so keen to send him to become a squire. The chance that he could attach himself to a stronger witch and bring them back to the family would be a failsafe against Cassie failing, but Wolfe didn't really mind. Being convicted of being a Magi was a death sentence, and being caught with the ability to use magic, but not convicted was no better, and Wolfe wasn't strong enough right now to protect himself. He needed to learn to master the powers he had and to learn to fight better than any common brawler. Only then could he live his life without fear of abduction. He had at least some tiny bit of power, but didn't have an entire family, and a witch mother behind him as Uncle Ivan did in his youth. Even with that, Ivan had been forced to flee for years and was still under surveillance. "Just let me know when I need to leave, and I will be ready." Wolfe agreed. It was an order from the family head and not really a choice, but politely agreeing cost him nothing. Roman chose that moment to speak up, reminding Wolfe that he was still in the room. "There is 1 week until the applicants leave, but it is best that you stay here until then. We can clean out your apartment for you, but it is best not to go out and expose yourself to the schemes of others who have seen you enter the main family. At least not so soon after you have awoken your powers. I will train you until you leave. Uncle Ivan taught me the same way, and family records have a technique for building your power. Supposedly, it will grant a worthy inheritor the legacy of the Noxus Archmages. Only time will tell how much it helps you." Roman stood up from his chair and stepped to the bookshelf on the wall of the office. He took down a plain leather book, more of a folder than what Wolfe would have called a proper book since it only had a few pages, and placed it on the table. "This is what we still know of how to advance as a Magi." This pamphlet-sized book was a miracle to Wolfe. Until today, he thought all knowledge of the Magi was destroyed, but now, with this, he has a chance to see just how knowledgeable they once were. The surviving pages seem to be an introduction from a training manual, a basic oversight of what a young Magi needed to do to become worthy of the title. To the person who wrote it, this was probably the most obvious thing in the world, but the Magi were secretive, not letting the outside mundane world know of their power, for fear of exactly what happened to them in the end. The rest of the world ganging up to kill them. Wolfe looked over the first page, somewhat charred and missing small sections before it was preserved in this plastic cover. "The power of the Magi is that of the world. Not the witch's power of life, but the primal indifference of the planet itself. Fire, lightning, and gravity are the building blocks of a Magi's power. The fire of the planet's core and the heat of the sun beating down on its surface are the strongest sources of fire imaginable by man. When a Magi is in tune with them, his control over fire becomes stronger. Lightning is the elusive element brought to life in the skies. It was once viewed as a niche affinity, but as science has grown, the power of electricity has become better known, tamed and spread across every aspect of life. Once they have learned the flow of man-made lightning, a Magi can amplify it 1,000 times, bringing a city's technology to life or burning it to ash. Finally, we have the most essential of forces in the universe, gravity. The power to move the tides, fly through the air, bond or debond the atom. Gravity is the structure that the universe is built upon. For now, young student, you will be studying these 3 basic principles to find your strongest initial affinity. The rest of the text was missing, but the knowledge that the surviving page had brought was life-changing. Wolfe was no fool. He graduated from high school and understood the concepts of gravity and the eternal heat of the stars burning in the sky. He even understood electricity well enough to modify his electric bike, but he suspected that was a much more shallow knowledge than what a Magi in the old world had. Gently, Wolfe flipped the page to see the backside, finding it mostly burnt black, but there was a single spell circle mostly visible and a few words of description that were too isolated to link to the rest. It was very different from the one he used to charge the batteries for the power tools he sold. Supposedly, that is part of the inheritance, but from what we can tell so far, it is a basic fire spell. From a drawn copy of the circle, I can conjure flames. But from what my mother told me, once you know the circle, an actual Magi should be able to use it to mentally focus their energy and create flames without actually drawing the circle itself. Think of it as a focusing aid that will turn your internal energy into an external fire. Or at least that's the theory. Uncle Ivan explained. Wolfe took a picture of the circle with his phone and zoomed in close enough that the context was hidden. Magical circles were everywhere these days. At least they were on high-end items, so having a picture of one was unremarkable and could be explained as trying to avoid being scammed. I will test it later when I am not taking up your time or surrounded by books, Wolfe replied, making Roman chuckle. The first page was incredible, but the second made the fire circle look unimportant. It was almost all gone, burned to ashes, but what remained was enough to be worth the effort of saving it. To expand your mana pouch. The pressure will loosen the restriction. Continue until STA. Begin the second. Wolfe idly flipped the page as he read and found that there was a diagram on the back of this one as well. Rank 7. Transition was what the remains of the caption said, above a partial drawing of the human body with 7 orbs in the chest, 6 small ones orbiting a 7th larger orb. That was exactly where the energy in his chest seemed to congregate, so the diagram must be the way to build up mana storage. The 2 elders waited while Wolfe processed this new knowledge, wondering how much he could make of it on his own. When he looked satisfied but did not speak, Roman decided to add what he knew to the boy's understanding. From what I have learned, putting pressure on your mana gland will cause it to swell a little in irritation, but the excess energy will flow into your body and fortify it. After years of practice, I am much stronger than the average man, Roman explained. That didn't sound right to Wolfe at all, and it didn't explain the part about beginning the second or the diagram. It might be a side effect, but he was sure it wasn't the intended result. What about if you hold it full? Does it permanently increase the capacity? Wolfe asked. Not for me, but it did for Uncle Ivan at the start. There is a chance that our affinity is just too low for what they were trying to teach. Roman shrugged. Now that was an answer that made sense to Wolfe. Everyone knew that not all witch-blooded women were at the same level. They even had a failed student in their own family. Looking at it that way, the elders were like Melody. They had tried to improve their skills, but lacked the ability. The question now was if Wolfe could do any better. Wolfe placed his fingertips on the diagram of the human body, and the charred remains of the page began to glow with soft light as magic flowed up his hand, then wrapped around his forearm, leaving it covered in a magical circle filled with runic writing. Neither of the men in the room reacted to the sight at all while Wolfe stared at his arm, reading the only intelligible words. Wolfe Noxus, Noxus clan Heir. After a few seconds, Uncle Ivan closed and carefully placed the thin book back on the shelf, where it blended in among the identically bound business reports and family census folders. Nobody would ever look for it there, as the information on that shelf would only ever matter to the head of the family. Anyone looking for valuable information would start among the rare books or in the safe. I will show you to your room, and you can practice tonight. Someone will come to get you for breakfast, and I will teach you what I know in the morning. Roman decided before opening the door and leading the very confused Wolfe out into the hallway. The room Wolfe was led to was a basic one, just a single bed, a small dresser, and a beanbag chair to decorate, but it was enough that the room was already close to feeling cramped. The inheritance, if that was what the spell that was now etched into his arm for only him to see really was, didn't tell him much. But the 2 elders had confirmed that drawing in as much mana as possible should slowly expand his storage capacity. So Wolfe settled into the beanbag chair and closed his eyes. Once he started the exercise, he found that pulling energy from his surroundings proved to be easier than he had expected, and he could already feel the thread of mana flowing into him. Once it was in his body, controlling the mana felt like guiding a liquid, so that's the visualization Wolfe chose for his meditation. Pour the liquid in until the sack was full, then hold and wait while it relaxed. Once the stretching pain subsided, add a little more. At first, the gland, or whatever that mana pouch should be called, felt no larger than the head of a pin, but it grew quickly as he worked away during the night. By the time Roman came to get him in the morning, Wolfe had managed to expand it to almost the size of a pea. He really didn't have a reference for what size he was trying to get it to, but this still felt far from complete. I see your night was productive. I can feel the difference in your presence from what it was yesterday. Before we eat, I will first show you how to mask that so that you aren't discovered by the first which you come within 2 blocks of. Roman greeted him from the doorway. The greedy look on Melody's chubby face came unbidden into Wolfe's thoughts, and he shuddered a little. Then his stomach grumbled loudly, announcing its displeasure at his change of schedule. I can see how that would be important. But I am suddenly starving, so do we have time to stop by the kitchen? Wolfe asked hopefully. That shouldn't be a problem as long as we keep you mixed in with the other elders. Most of the family will be assembling for breakfast in the next few minutes. It is much less formal than dinner, but much larger since about half the people living in the compound come here to eat. Roman agreed. The compound? Wolfe asked. The main house and the 4 surrounding buildings are encompassed within a single outer wall as one community. In all, there are about 200 people in the compound, and they all work for the family. Think of breakfast like a morning briefing before everyone goes to the office. Roman explained with a smile. That sounded like complete chaos to Wolfe. Evenly split between parents and children, that was 100 adults, with about 50 coming to breakfast. There was a school only a block away, so it made sense for the kids in the compound to gather in one spot before class. Wolfe lived further away, so the morning gathering was never part of his routine, but he could imagine that it was actually a nightmare for the less popular kids. Roman led Wolfe to a small table at the end of the room where a few of the other elders were sitting, then pulled out a chair for Wolfe between himself and a whip-thin woman with mismatched eyes. Wolfe, this is Maria. She is Cassie and Melody's grandmother. Miss Cassie is her favorite, so I'm sure she is nervous about classes starting next week. Roman introduced the gray-haired woman. I am sure you have nothing to worry about. Cassie seemed like the sort that had the potential to surprise us all. Wolfe greeted her. Maria raised a carefully groomed eyebrow at Wolfe's words. I believe yesterday was the first time you two had met. What gave you the impression that she had more potential than her sister? Maria asked. It's always the quiet ones with the most to hide. Wolfe shrugged. Really, he couldn't explain the feeling of inner strength and potential that she gave him, so he just went with the most simple explanation that he could think of. You have good eyes, young man. Make sure you find yourself a witch to pair with so you can watch out for Cassie in the 2nd year. Maria said with a wink. Wolfe looked to Roman for an explanation, as he knew very little about the academy they intended to send him to. Squires get 1 year of intensive training to prove themselves. If a witch chooses them as a potential guardian, they can continue to the 2nd year. I hear that they're going to change things up this year, though, and the coven is being super secretive about it. Not even the commoner witch families that we do business with know what the plan is going to be for this year. Most likely, it will still be to have the guardian candidates in the 2nd dorms on the campus, but I heard a rumor that they were going to run off all the butlers, toy boys, and random attendants that the nobles like to sneak in, to take care of their girls in various ways. For the record, we fully support you becoming a guardian. Choose well, as only the competent witches retain their right to a proper guardian. If the one you pick is too weak, you will be reassigned after they've finished the year, and not necessarily to a guardian position. You might end up as a junior traffic guard in the upper levels waiting on a promotion that never comes. Roman explained. Wolfe decided that the witches really did have an annoyingly high number of rules. But they also had all the power and all the spells, so he needed them more than they needed one more guardian. At least for now. Did you go to the academy as well? Wolfe asked Elder Maria. She should have if both her granddaughters were going. I did. But like my daughters, I failed to make it through the 1st year. Unlike them, I can do very basic magic, just not enough to be recognized as even a commoner witch. The old woman responded with a hint of restrained pride. Maria keeps the lights on around here. It's a huge cost saving. I am sure you know very well how expensive the power bill can get. Roman told Wolfe with a smile. His face soon turned serious, and he looked down at his plate while speaking softly. If only she hadn't been injured. The man beside him nodded in agreement while Maria pretended to ignore Roman's comment. The academy is a vicious place, full of nobles doing anything they can to get ahead. Don't just watch your back. Watch your front as well, because some who pretend to be your friends will openly sabotage you when you least expect it. She whispered. Wolfe took that message to heart. Just because they were wealthy and noble didn't mean that an academy full of the children of witches would be any less dangerous than life in the lower levels. Where's the academy anyhow? I don't recall seeing it on the map. Is it on the upper floors? Wolfe asked. It isn't in the city at all. The academy is the wastelands outside the city limits. Well, we call it the wastelands, but lately, the area around the campus looks much more like a well-maintained forest than the war-devastated waste from the school books. I don't think they want the people to know that the world is recovering. There are still loads of monsters out there. Mutated, magically created and risen from the dead, but the land itself is beginning to recover in the spots where the witches have worked their magic. Maria explained quietly, as this wasn't a fact well known to everyone. Life for most in the mega-cities was hard and dirty. The honest sorts worked themselves to death for the good of the nobles, which meant that many people would rather risk the monsters if they knew that the planet could sustain life again. Wolfe didn't mind the dirt, and he had found himself good work, so he wasn't just barely scraping by, but even then, the thought of actual sunlight and fresh air was appealing to him. It must be tough coming back from the academy and out of the sunlight, Max said to Maria, who clearly disagreed. The sun is dangerous. Most mutants and undead hunt in the daytime, but worst of all, the other witches will be awake. Coming back was the first time most failed applicants felt safe in a year. It was pleasantly warm on the skin, though. The old woman reminisced. We should excuse ourselves for now. Wolfe has a lot to learn before leaving at the end of the week. Roman told the others politely as everyone finished eating. Do come by again, Wolfe. You are young, but you are one of us now, and we will help you with anything we can. Elder Maria told him with a wink. Wolfe smiled back at the female elder, who supposedly could use enough mana to power their entire family complex's everyday needs. I will hold you to that. Elder Roman led Wolfe to a quiet office overlooking the back gardens, a true luxury in this crowded city, and sat down in a soft leather recliner. As I said earlier, before you can go anywhere, you first need to know how to hide yourself. Fortunately, the former matriarch of the family left us with a method to do just that. Naturally, your power will want to radiate outward, which will help you perceive your surroundings and detect other living things. While that is useful, it allows any nearby witch, even those too weak to be properly called witches, to sense your nature as a Magi. This note and spell circle show you how to fold it in on yourself, so the difference will be noticeable only with direct physical contact. If you deplete your mana reserves first, they might miss you even then. Roman explained, handing over the spell. Like the few other spells that Wolfe had encountered, this one was simple, just a fancy circle and an invocation. The note said that with practice, both could be done mentally and would stay in effect for a week at a time. Wolfe took a photo of the circle to remember it later and focused on trying to activate it. The incantation was nothing more than a short rhyme, which seemed silly and pointless to him, just a mental trick to make the spell work for those not strong enough to activate the inscription fully. That was how witch magic usually worked, though. They cast spells with incantations, reagents, and potions. But they were all for the purposes of letting the witches use magic in ways that their bodies couldn't handle on their own. When they wanted to do mind charms on animals or affect plants, they didn't need any of that and, at most, only used a wand to help them focus, or so said the movies Wolfe grew up with. It wasn't that they were weak at things like this, it was that their magic was never meant to be able to do it in the first place, and they had found a way to work around their limitations with various tricks and assistants, increasing their versatility far beyond the keepers of nature that they were born to be. With a few seconds focus on the circle in front of him and the effect he wanted, Wolfe snapped the spell into place. It wasn't exactly what the matriarch had described it as, though. Yes, it turned the radiant power inward, but it also caused mana to flow into his body, absorbed faster than usual and without any additional effort on his part. The note said that the spell was called Guardian Crest, so Wolfe assumed it must be something learned at the academy, likely to empower their spells through their guardians. Do you know what else this spell is used for? Wolfe asked Roman suspiciously. I know that, as the name suggests, every guardian's armor bears the mark of that circle, minus some of the spell elements. I have seen that reduced version on magical items as well. If I recall, they use it as a very basic form of a mana-gathering circle. The matriarch experimented with it until she found a version that worked to hide the Magi lineage of the men in the family. Roman informed him. And it works very well at gathering mana. I can feel the difference already. Wolfe replied, making the old man smile. A true prodigy. Be sure to keep it active, but also be aware that storing mana in the body enhances it. Soon you will be much stronger than your peers, and if any of the witches notice you doing something supernaturally strong or fast, you could be in trouble. The original Magi were supposed to be able to leap over buildings and punch through vehicle doors without using a spell. Some of that was surely due to their abilities with gravity control, but the Patriarch had already begun to feel stronger as a youth when he worked to improve his mana capacity. Roman explained. Wolfe had felt the same way. Gathering mana into his body and channeling it out was already making him stronger, with only a single day's practice. Once Elder Roman was satisfied with his ability to hide from casual inspection, Wolfe returned to his room to begin working on his mana capacity. At first, the growth had been very easy to feel since he had very little mana, so even a small increase could improve his total mana capacity by a quarter or more. All he had to do was push in as much mana as he could, and then wait for results. Wolfe had just gotten his mana pouch filled to its new limit when there was a knock at the door, and a soft shuffling of feet could be heard from outside. He considered ignoring it, but it might be someone important as he was at the Noxus main house, and had just spent the morning learning family secrets. He straightened his clothes, opened the door, and stood up tall, expecting to be facing one of the family elders, but instead, he was met with the light brown hair and shy smile of Cassie Noxus, the family's hope for a new witch in the lineage. She was holding a tray of assorted meats and cheese with crackers and a letter in an ornate red envelope. "What brings you by this afternoon? Please, do come in. I will take the tray for you." Wolfe welcomed her into his tiny room. The only place to put the tray was on the dresser, and Wolfe realized just how awkward this situation was. With the dresser covered in food, the only place to sit was on the bed, which was a mess from him sitting on it to meditate. "Oh, the letter is from Grandma Maria. She gave it to me when I said I was coming to see you," Cassie whispered. "We need to work on your confidence. I learned a little about the culture of the Witches' Academy from your grandma today, and they will crush your very soul if you don't stand up for yourself," Wolfe told her, guiding her to sit on the bed and taking a seat beside her. "I'm much better with other girls, but I get so nervous around men that I can't function," she whispered with a blush staining her cheeks. "So your grandmother sent you with food to work on your human interaction issues?" Wolfe asked. Cassie shook her head. "My mother said if you were my friend, you might help me at the academy. But the only thing I know that all boys like is food. I asked my sister, but well, she wasn't useful." She covered her mouth in shock at what she said, and Wolfe wondered what Melody had suggested. Based on his first impression, it could be almost anything. "Why don't I read the elder's note first?" he asked, taking the letter from Cassie's hand. "Wolfe, as I said, please take good care of my granddaughter. She is very bright when she's not too nervous to talk." Or you could skip the talking and move straight to getting to know each other much better than words could teach. "I only expect 7 great-grandchildren, preferably soon. It's your call, Maria. I think your grandmother misinterpreted your reason for coming to see me." Wolfe laughed, placing the letter on the dresser by the snacks. Cassie nodded. "She's a bit different. When she was at the academy, one of her rivals and a guardian broke into grandmother's room and attacked her. The injuries to her head made it impossible to use magic properly even after she healed. She seemed pretty normal to Wolfe, but Cassie knew her better, so maybe she wasn't always like that. Or she was in a situation like Uncle Ivan and had been forced to hide away from the world by putting on an act for those who weren't in the inner circle of her trusted allies. Wolfe stacked a cracker with meat and took a bite while he considered the answer, noticing how nervous Cassie was. "Did something happen that made you afraid of men?" he asked. Cassie shook her head. "I don't think it was one thing. My sister has always hated me, and she would turn the other kids against me with lies to make her look like a victim. Even our older brothers fell for it. I live with Grandma Maria now, but she still found ways to get them to beat me up and pick on me at school." In Wolfe's experience, at least one kid at school always got picked on for no particular reason other than that they were the kid that got picked on. It was basically a universal law. Since Cassie was that person, she would need a bit of work with her self-confidence, but Wolfe was willing to help. "I don't know how much interaction the witches and guardian candidates will have at the academy, so I will help you prepare to become the sort of witch that nobody can pick on, Wolfe assured her, setting his hand on her thigh. Cassie looked startled for a second, then realized that Wolfe wasn't going to bully or hit her and began to blush even more deeply than she already had been. Wolfe decided that growing up without friends had left her far too innocent, but her blush was very cute, and he wanted to see more of it, not teach her how to keep it hidden. In his opinion, the best thing he could do for her in the next few days was to change the way she looked at the world. Right now, she saw everyone as a danger to be avoided, but if Wolfe's guess and her grandmother's praise were correct, she was actually far more powerful than any of them, just lacking the knowledge to apply that power. The first thing is confidence. You need to show it. Even if you're actually terrified inside, put on a front. Think of how your sister pretends she's some prize catch that every man should want. That false confidence that she exudes is a valuable skill. Wolfe tried to explain. But she is. She is heir to the family business as the strongest daughter. She has witch blood, plus she's rich, thanks to our mother spoiling her. Cassie pointed out. Riches at that level mean nothing to a real witch. But witch blood. You have that too, and you are the stronger daughter. By rights, you could claim leadership not just of your branch of the family business, but the entire Noxus family once you finish your second year at the academy. Inside, you are an adorable and kind young woman whom any man would be proud to be with. But she is the town bicycle. Everybody has gotten a ride. When she marries, it will only be for influence to a man who can hardly stand her. Wolfe offered, making Cassie giggle at his description of her sister, then look horrified and cover her mouth in shame. You don't need to hide your smile. It's a good smile. Anyone who sees it will be drawn to you. I guarantee it, he added. If he was going to keep spending time here at the main house, he could see that hanging out with Cassie was going to become his favorite pastime very quickly. Once she was past the initial amusement, Cassie almost bit her tongue, trying to resist saying anything regarding Wolfe's insinuations about her sister. It was an open secret that the girl had taken more than a few boyfriends, but nobody had dared speak of it so openly in the past. Wolfe wasn't done yet, though. Look in that mirror on the dresser. See that smile, that easygoing posture? That is the real you, the one you want to be at the academy. Even if someone there remembers your sister, they will remember her as a failure, a fake witch who couldn't pass her classes. You are a much better student, and every single elder knows it. This is your chance to show the world who you can be without anyone's outside influence. Do you think they would let me officially change my name? With a different last name than her, I don't think anyone would connect us. It would be like she never existed, Cassie suggested. Wolfe grabbed another meat-covered cracker to give himself to think before answering. What name did she go under? From what the elders said, I think the academy knows who sponsored the students. She went under Tynes with our mother as a sponsor. Cassie shrugged as if it was obvious. Maybe it was, but Wolfe didn't know much about the inner workings of the Noxus family or the academy. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door, and the sickly sweet stench of body odor masked with excessive amounts of perfume reached Wolfe's nose. He was certain that smelling someone from the other side of the door wasn't normal, but he could not ignore it now that he had noticed. Who is it? Wolfe called while Cassie glared at the door. It's Melody. Do you have a few moments to talk? The young woman's voice responded in a very suggestive tone that caused Cassie to make a gagging motion. My apologies, but your perfume is causing my allergies to act up. Perhaps we could speak at dinner. Wolfe replied, and Cassie had to bite her fist to avoid laughing out loud. I am so sorry. I didn't realize you suffered from allergies. She was clearly pouting now, but Wolfe wasn't letting that smell in his tiny room. You couldn't have known. But both Cassie and I could use your insight into life at the academy since we're leaving in less than a week. I do hope we can make time for a nice chat, just the three of us. I will leave you to your work then. See you at dinner. Melody seemed upset at the mention of her sister and left right afterward, while Cassie turned to face Wolfe with an anxious look. Before she could speak, the door swung open, and Elder Maria entered, then locked the door behind her. I'm not going to ask what happened, but I just saw Melody crying and running for the showers while half naked. I will warn you that any bit of skin contact could give you away before you master the disguise technique. Maria reminded Wolfe without preamble, ignoring Cassie's presence. I didn't let her in. Her perfume was incredibly potent, even through the door. Wolfe explained, defending his honor as much as he could since he was still sitting on the bed with Cassie. The patriarch has the same issue. No perfume or cologne is allowed in his office. It must be inherited. But that's not why I'm here. I have a task for my granddaughter that you might be able to help with. Noble families send their children to the academy with a few magical items. The patriarch tells me you should have a knack for forging magical circles without all of the usual reagents. So I want you to work with her to make something that can be passed off as an heirloom item from one of the commoner witches that our family had in the past generations. Cassie, you don't need to hide your power from Wolfe. He will see it soon enough, and you need something to bring to the academy if you don't want to start at the bottom. The elder explained. Like a wand or focused talisman for gathering mana. I've watched a lot of online videos where the witches use them to do large spells. Wolfe asked. That could work if you can find the ingredients. I still have my first-year textbook as well. The academy might not use that edition anymore since they started to focus more on combat skills, but it still has most of the same basic spells, which a proper commoner witch would be able to use. Maria agreed. Maria had come prepared and had a maid waiting outside with her school books. Not just her textbook, but a small collection of herbs, metallic markers, and other objects used for simple spells, things that the witches didn't restrict the purchase of. Look through and see what you can manage. There is enough here to make a few attempts, but I am certain my Cassie can manage it. A witch doesn't fully come into their power until 18 years old, so she hasn't had much time to practice, but I have faith. Maria assured them with a sly smile. She knew that even if Cassie couldn't get it on her own with no training, Wolfe could use at least some mana and could potentially help her. Maria left as soon as she handed them the books, giving Wolfe a suggestive look that reminded him that her letter had mentioned she wasn't adverse to them skipping the academy entirely and starting with the great-grandchildren instead. Do you think that we can manage a mana storage trinket? It sounded like the most useful thing that I could have during my first few weeks at the academy. Cassie asked, expertly flipping the pages of the textbook to the desired page. The circle on the page looked incredibly similar to both the battery charging circle and the inscription for hiding his aura. If anything, it might be a bit easier to draw. There had been a collection of symbols in the outer ring of the battery charging circle that had been switched for an easier-to-draw angular rune in this version. How is your handwriting? Getting the circle exactly right is important, or the online videos say that it won't work correctly. Wolfe asked, thinking of the hasty research he had done to run his self-charging battery scam. Pretty good. Grandma had been training me with a regular pen in preparation for the academy. I am surprised that you know so much about magical inscriptions, though. Normally, only witch fangirls are familiar enough to be aware of how sensitive they are to mistakes. Cassie told him with a nostalgic smile. It's a long story. I will tell you all about it some other time. Wolfe chuckled, then took the time to memorize the inscription that they were about to draw. The more he looked at it, the easier it was to remember, like the inscription triggered something in him and embedded itself in his consciousness. The inscriptions were originally Magi magic, and the witches had just appropriated and modified them for their own use, so maybe it really was something that was part of him, or perhaps part of his inheritance. There was no way to tell for sure, but in only a few minutes of looking at the inscription, Wolfe was certain that he could accurately replicate it without having to see it again. Cassie had a collection of wooden tokens that she was planning to use for the attempt. They were nothing special. The bargain store sold them as drink coasters, and the wood was a very soft, fast-growing variety similar to balsa wood. They would do for a talisman, though, and if it worked, they could be dipped in a durable epoxy to keep them from being damaged. The first step was to draw the circle with a pen and make sure it was correct, then carve the correct lines and fill the inscription with the appropriate marker. If you tried to draw with the paint marker without carving first, it usually bled on the surface and ruined the intricate shape of the runes. Every kid learned that in the 3rd grade while trying to make an arts and crafts project. Once that was perfect and the remaining materials were placed on top, mana was introduced to activate the circle. These circles weren't the witches' natural magic, but an adaptation to add versatility to their skills and integrate them with the modern world. They could often do the same thing, and usually more effectively, with a potion or a curse. The problem was that potions had a limited duration, and a curse had potentially debilitating side effects. But they had no other options for things like lightning or similar charms. The elements other than nature were outside their purview. For a witch to be able to use the other elements, she had to rely on reagents and magical inscriptions. Cassie had very tidy writing, and her first circle looked nearly perfect. One rune needed to be adjusted, but that was better than expected for a first attempt that couldn't be traced from a pre-made template. It doesn't need much, just the circle and a sprig of herb. It says to use the one that I have the best affinity with. How do I tell that? Cassie muttered, looking at the pile of ingredients they had. Try drawing mana in and then touch each of them in turn, Wolfe suggested. They were trying to collect mana, so that made the most sense to him. Wolfe took the token and began carving the circle, carefully referencing the book as he went. It was the same as doing the batteries, and his hand seemed to instinctively know which way it needed to go to make the perfect rune. Cassie checked the herbs one by one, finding that dandelion flowers resonated best with her. Wolfe had finished his work and was double-checking the runes, so she reached out and tapped him on the arm where his sleeve had pulled up while he was working, keeping the wood chips from sticking to his sleeve. An immediate flood of mana poured into her body from his, and Wolfe sat up with a sudden jerk. He had been practicing his mana collection earlier, and his mana pouch was stretched full. The contact made Cassie's eyes glow bright purple from behind her colored contact lenses, and Wolfe stared at her in awe. Jewel-colored eyes in adulthood were said to be a sign of powerful witches, and now he understood why Elder Maria was so protective of this particular granddaughter. You're the best material. But how? Blood magic isn't a thing, Cassie asked. Wolfe knew that wasn't true. Or at least it hadn't always been true. He grew up on the lower levels, where witches were feared, not revered, and the old folks told horror stories of the witches using human sacrifices to power black magics during the war. Noxus family elders all have an affinity for magic, including the men, though they can't actually use any on their own. You need to keep silent about it, though. Letting anyone know could get everyone in this household killed. Wolfe warned her before she started coming to conclusions on her own. Touching you brought the most mana into me, though. Do you think it would be possible that you are actually the best medium we have for a mana charm? Cassie asked. Honestly, yes. We don't have much to work with, so a family elder with an affinity for magic is almost certainly better than a simple flower from the garden. Wolfe agreed hesitantly, knowing where this was going. Cassie already had the extractor needle out, giving him an eager look as she planned her strategy for the final creation of the amulet. Fine, I will draw a bit of blood to use, but I am totally blaming it on you if someone realizes what this is made with. If anyone asks, a family elder gave this to you as a gift, and you just charged it so you could use it. Wolfe told her, drawing a small amount of blood from his arm. It will be perfect. I just know it. Cassie insisted, mixing the small vial of blood with the paint in the marker using a thin stir stick. Those weren't the directions, but everything else they had was a herb, so Wolfe assumed that this was something that Elder Maria had taught her. She gently took the prepared token from Wolfe and began to work. The mana infusion had to match the drawing speed, and she was drawing mana as quickly as she could, but the effort was clearly draining her stamina. Since he knew now that touching her would give her mana, Wolfe removed his glove and placed his bare hand on the back of her neck. She twitched a little at the contact, but Wolfe could feel the mana moving from his body to hers at a rapid pace. The stress on her face faded, and her movements became smooth as she drew the circle on the talisman. As she finished, the symbol glowed bright purple, and all of the stored mana in Wolfe's body was suddenly drained. Cassie let out a soft moan at the feeling before passing out and dropping the marker on the bed beside her. Wolfe moved quickly, grabbing the paint marker and putting the cap back on before it damaged the talisman, then checked on the unconscious witch. She was already beginning to move again, though her face was flushed and her hands were trembling. She also wouldn't look Wolfe in the eyes, and he wondered if perhaps he had crossed a line with the extremely shy girl by suddenly touching her bare skin. She had some self-confidence issues, but the contact was strictly to help her spell casting, so he hoped she wouldn't take offense. It's all right. I'm all right, she whispered, then gave Wolfe a shy smile. Grandma warned me that drawing mana from a living being was a pleasant and intimate experience, but I didn't expect the reaction to be that strong. Sorry if I startled you, but it was a bit overwhelming, Cassie said softly. Oh, it was a pleasurable sort of feeling that made her pass out. Now Wolfe felt awkward. Time to change the subject. How about you check that talisman and see how it turned out? Cassie nodded in relief that Wolfe wasn't going to push the topic, but he noticed that her eyes kept flickering back over to him, even though she was checking the status of the talisman. Wow, these are amazing. I didn't know that a mana talisman could help so much. I was told that having a familiar doubled your mana collection rate, so I thought the talisman had the same effect, but that's not what it does at all. She looked at Wolfe as if he should understand, so he placed a finger on the token, but it only flowed one way. He could put mana in it, but not draw it out. So, that's what he did. Wolfe focused his mana collection and filled the talisman, finding that it stopped accepting mana at about a quarter of his maximum capacity. I can't use it, so I have no idea how fast you can draw from it, but I filled it with mana for you, Wolfe told her. Oh, thank you. Well, how do I put it? That's a lot of mana. How fast can you draw enough to fill that? Even the Patriarch can only use a very tiny bit of mana, so I have nothing to compare to, Cassie asked. I don't know. A minute or so, or about as fast as I filled that talisman, I suppose. I have never actually tested it before. Wolfe shrugged. Cassie fell into deep thought, staring at the talisman which would so greatly improve her abilities. She knew from her sister's experience that commoner students were often robbed during their early days at the academy and would have a hard time proving that the lost items were theirs to begin with, so she would have to do something to protect this talisman. Without it, she should be able to pass her first-year entrance exam easily, but she didn't know if she would be strong enough to earn any respect from her classmates. Elder Maria had told her many times that strength and confidence were what really matters in the academy. You could increase one to make up for a little of the other, but eventually, you would need pure strength to pass your classes. Until the first year was up, you would have to do it alone since the bond with a new familiar took time to grow, and Guardian candidates wouldn't get the magical armor with the mana-collecting inscription on it until they graduated. Unless you got lucky with a very powerful familiar, that was. Working with Wolfe hadn't been like that, though. She felt more powerful the moment that he touched her, even before she started drawing his mana. Maybe they could do it again and make a backup talisman? Cassie's core clenched at the memory of the last attempt, and her cheeks flushed in embarrassment at having been seen in such a state. Should make a second talisman? A backup in case this one gets stolen or damaged? Wolfe asked, thinking the same thing as Cassie, but oblivious to her internal dilemma. That is actually a good idea. If I wear one and keep the other hidden, nobody will suspect me until after the first one is lost. It should get me through the early days at the academy, which grandmother said were the worst for commoners. Until they prove themselves or find a safe spot in the social order of the academy, the new witches can have it pretty rough. Have you prepared yourself? I heard from grandmother that the guardian candidates from the noble families are ruthless. They run off so many of the commoners from their academy that the second-year students have trouble finding enough candidates and often have to share them for combat training. Melody wouldn't talk about much of her time at the academy, so I don't know how things are now. Wolfe had somewhat expected that, but he was a very strong fighter even before he had learned that building his mana capacity helped strengthen his body. Surely some of the noble's sons would have been granted items with similar effects, though, so he might not have any advantage. I am preparing as well as I can. I am almost there and should be ready before we leave. Wolfe's smile relaxed Cassie a little. Looking back at her past, she could see that he had all the confidence that she was lacking, which made her a bit bitter. His scarred face and previously broken nose showed that he didn't have an easy childhood, but he was still confident, whereas she had simply gone along with everything and sacrificed her pride as a survival technique. Let's start on that second talisman then. If we make another pair of amulets, you can give your grandmother one as a gift before you go. She seems like the sort that appreciates handmade gifts. Wolfe continued, picking up a piece of wood to begin the work again. As he worked, Wolfe drew more mana into himself, and by the time they were both finished their carvings, he was back up to almost half capacity. Wolfe stopped Cassie before she could start filling in the circle on her talisman with the marker, knowing that she would need assistance to finish without exhausting herself. Wait for a second. If I place you here and put my hands against you while you write, you can draw mana from both of us at once. Wolfe picked the slender brunette up as he spoke and placed her in his lap, wrapping his arms around her waist and lifting the bottom of her cardigan to place his bare hands against her skin. As expected, the tingle of mana sparked at the contact, but it quickly faded after a few seconds of contact. Cassie's breathing was still rapid, though, and her face was flushed, but she didn't make any attempt to move from her new position. Instead, she clenched her jaw and focused on the talisman, beginning to draw. Wolfe had to resist the urge to tease her while she worked, but the additional contact made controlling the mana flow into her much easier. The moment of truth was drawing the final rune when the circle flashed with purple light and tried to draw all the mana out of his body. This time Wolfe was prepared and held back the force, releasing the flow over 5 seconds instead of having it all gone in an instant. That also seemed to help Cassie, though the happy noises she was making as mana flowed through her weren't helping Wolfe maintain his own composure. You're still conscious this time. Would you like to do the last one while we are here, or should we wait? Cassie's breathing steadied, though she was squirming a little in Wolfe's lap, trying to hide her embarrassment. Let's do the last. And next time, we are finding a less embarrassing way to do this. Cassie muttered the last under her breath, but not so quietly that Wolfe's sensitive hearing couldn't make it out. This way was far better than any other option he had thought of. He would have to think of more excuses to hold her in his arms, even if it meant bribing Elder Maria to make up some nonsense about it being necessary. As long as they were getting along, he was certain he could get the old woman on his side. There was no stored mana in Wolfe's body for the final talisman, and he had to draw it as they went. That meant there was no large surge at the end, but there was a long draw of mana to complete the spell, which climbed to a gentle glow, fainter by far than either of the others, but still impressive from what Cassie had seen in her research of the subject. Cassie was exhausted at this point and curled into his chest, breathing heavily as he held her upright. They were still in that position, with Wolfe leaning against the headboard of the bed when Elder Maria came to tell them to get ready for dinner. Oh, don't let me interrupt. The Patriarch wants everyone at dinner in a half hour, though. He has some news that he wants to share with the family. You two should shower first and change. The Elder's smirk was impossible to miss, and Cassie covered her face with her hands, but Wolfe still had a hold on her waist, and her legs didn't reach the floor, so she couldn't flee. Before you go, we made you a gift. Cassie wanted you to have something as a thank you for all the effort you put into caring for her. Please take this trinket. Wolfe told the Elder while channeling mana into the third talisman that they had created. The capacity was under half of what the first one was, but it was still a functional item and rather pretty, with the rose-silver lines of the circle made with his blood mixed in. This is incredible. You two made this together? Maria asked. Cassie nodded her head but didn't look up at all. We just finished. I have to ask you something before dinner if you have time, Grandma. Wolfe helped her to her feet since she was still a little shaky with exhaustion, but Elder Maria took hold of Cassie and ushered her out of the room right away, leaving Wolfe alone again. They forgot the other talismans. I suppose I can set them in resin while I shower and polish them after dinner, Wolfe decided. Wolfe called on one of the house's many maids to bring him the required materials for a resin casting, which they conveniently had available in the crafts supplies for the kids, and coated the first and strongest amulet that they made in clear resin for protection. Instead of clear resin, the second was set into an opaque green resin and put into a larger container. He had always had skill with carving, and he intended to make a fake jade amulet from this one so that Cassie could wear it as a family heirloom. Their Noxus family crest was a venomous snake wrapped in a circle with a cluster of interlocking runes in the middle. It looked a lot like a spell circle to Wolfe, so while he showered, he decided that he would test that theory as he carved. The resin wouldn't be ready until after dinner, so he put on a clean set of clothes and left for the dining room, moving the curing resin out of sight and locking the door behind him. He didn't need others to see what he was up to and start asking questions that he couldn't or wouldn't answer. While Wolfe was busy making resin molds, Cassie was having an intense conversation with her grandmother. "Seriously, you evil witch, how could you not warn me? You said that drawing mana was a personal experience between a familiar and a witch, but you didn't warn me about that." The young woman complained. "It is just a little feeling of affection. There's no need to be melodramatic," Maria replied, rolling her eyes at the raging teen emotions confronting her. "A little affection?" When the mana flowed from him through me to finish the spell, the pleasure hit me so hard that I passed out. Literally passed out in his arms and woke up in his bed. "Do you have any idea how mortified I was?" Cassie complained. Maria's eyes went large as she listened to her granddaughter's explanation. "You what now? Oh, you naughty girl, who knew you were so sensitive when using a human as a familiar? Are you sure that you want to give me this? Even after you went through all that to create it? It only happened the first time. That talisman was our third attempt, and we were both tired, I think, so the experience wasn't as intense. But it seemed to last forever." Cassie whispered while her grandmother stared at her in disbelief. "You're telling me that after what happened the first time, you did it twice more, knowing it would probably happen again?" the elder asked. "I wanted a backup talisman in case it was stolen after I got to the academy. Plus, it wasn't as bad with more skin contact. With more practice controlling the flow of mana, I think it will just be pleasant," Cassie explained. "My girl, you will fit right in at the academy. But if the other talismans are this strong, I am certain someone will want them. Even most second years with trained familiars can't make a storage talisman with this much capacity. Be careful who you let see them," Maria told her with a concerned frown. Powerful was good, but too much power invited envy. Maria got Cassie showered and changed into a fresh sweater dress and tights before leading her down to dinner, making sure she was seated between the elder and Wolfe. "I heard that you are getting along well with my granddaughter, so I rearranged the seating for dinner. I hope you don't mind," Maria asked with a wink at Wolfe. "Not at all. We might not see each other for a while after she leaves for the academy since the schedules don't quite match, according to the patriarch. It is good for us to get to know each other while we have the time," Wolfe replied, returning the wink just for the blush that it brought to Cassie's face. If looks could kill, Melody would have just assassinated her sister. She wasn't even trying to hide her rage at seeing their friendly interaction after Wolfe turned her down earlier that same day. Uncle Ivan, the Noxus family patriarch, stopped their banter and silenced the dining room by standing up to address the assembled family members. "There has been an incident in our territory that requires everyone's attention. A high-level magical item was traced back to our floor, and the witches believe an exiled noble which is hiding among us. The countess who governs our floor has asked for the family's assistance to find the fugitive. The witch's accomplice was found dead outside our territory, but on this floor, and it was the only clue that they had to go on," Uncle Ivan informed them. "One more body usually wouldn't be enough to attract attention from the higher floors. Do we know what tipped them off? It wasn't something we're doing, was it?" one of the elders asked with a meaningful look at Elder Maria. "No, a witch on an upper level made the report. I couldn't get all the details, but it seems that the item cursed someone, and it was too powerful for a commoner to have cast," the patriarch explained, and Wolfe began to relax a little. When the speech started, he suspected it had to do with his counterfeit batteries, but if someone was cursed, that meant it wasn't about him. But then he realized that the Coven security teams would be here much sooner than anticipated. He needed to get out of the search area before they caught on to the fact that he could use mana. He could hide his mana well enough for most situations, but a search team would include dozens of people, specialized spells to detect even the faintest traces of mana and recent spell casting, as well as hounds to track suspects once they were close enough to catch a scent. None of those techniques was something that Wolfe was capable of dealing with on his own, and with so little time to prepare, he wasn't sure that even Uncle Ivan would be able to keep him safe through this. Everyone needs to discard or use up any and all contraband that they have in the compound. We will have noble witches joining us as guests in the morning. Uncle Ivan finished, and everyone began to panic. That wasn't enough time for Wolfe to put his plan into action. Everything in the city would be locked down after curfew, meaning he couldn't leave the city tonight even if he wanted to. Wolfe's thoughts immediately went to the mana crystals that he had refilled early this morning. Being caught with even a trace of those was more than a simple misdemeanor. "Elder Maria, where might we use up some excess mana crystals?" he whispered, leaning across Cassie, so he didn't have to raise his voice. "Seriously, Wolfe? Do you have no fear or sense of self-preservation at all? Give it to me after dinner." The elder reprimanded him with a disbelieving look. "That doesn't mean our talismans, right?" Cassie asked, but Maria shook her head. "Those are legitimate. Wolfe is talking about something very different and strictly forbidden by law," she explained, still glaring at Wolfe. "It's not that bad. Just a little, small, tiny thing. Well, a few of them, but an easy problem to solve," Wolfe assured Cassie, placing his hand on her thigh and making her blush. "Enough flirting. Finish your meal so we can talk," Elder Maria announced at full volume, drawing quiet laughter from all over the dining room. As soon as their plates were cleared and without even waiting for the patriarch to finish his meal, as would normally be polite, Maria led Wolfe out with a hand on the back of his shirt after sending Cassie back to her room. It was a silent trip, but she turned on Wolfe once they were safely in a soundproof office. "Explain, now." Wolfe pulled out the mana crystals he had charged and placed them on the desk in front of her. "The aura doesn't match the crystal. What did you plan on doing with these? Where did you even get them? Was it the witch in hiding?" Maria demanded. Wolfe shook his head. "No, I recharged these myself. I was going to dump them into the building mana pool to pay my bills, but I didn't get a chance." "And you thought that was a good idea?" "Why?" Maria asked. "Free money, of course. If you empty and destroy them, nobody should ever know the difference. It's not like I was going to cash it for credits," Wolfe explained. "The auditors record the aura signature of all energy remaining in a storage bank when they visit. You could have gotten a government strike force called in to investigate your building and everyone for 10 blocks. I will destroy these accursed forgeries, and we will never speak of this again," Maria insisted. "Got it. That's on the never do it again list," Wolfe agreed. "Good. Now destroy any other contraband you have and get some sleep. The morning will come early. Government witches like to come at first light to put people off balance," Maria instructed him, leaving Wolfe to his own devices. He didn't have anything else that needed to be hidden, so Wolfe returned to his room and began carving and polishing the 2 amulets. If he needed to flee in the morning, he would at least leave Cassie the talismans they made. The clear one was a simple, clean, and polished job, forming it into a smooth disc, then attaching a simple ribbon to hold it around her neck. The ribbon was long enough it could also be worn around a leg or her slender waist, keeping it secure and out of sight in almost any situation. At least, that was what Wolfe hoped. The second talisman he carved into a copy of the family crest. Just like with the other magical inscriptions, his hand seemed to be guided by instinct along the right path when forming the runes. It came out subtly different from the usual family crest, but Wolfe was certain this was the correct version. With both items finished, he snuck over to Cassie's room, finding it locked and the sound of gentle snoring coming from inside. So he went looking for Elder Maria and asked her to give them to their intended recipient in the morning. On his way back to his room, the patriarch called him into his office for a few words. "I know this isn't optimal, but I have set up a pickup outside the city walls for first thing in the morning. It will only show to you in the courier rider's bids until it is accepted, so take it as soon as you wake up and head for the outer walls. If you can make it out, don't come back for a week at the very least. I will have the farm on the outside, make an excuse about dangerous roads, and give you a note when you return. But under no circumstances should you return to our floor before this investigation ends. They might not be searching for you on paper, but they're always searching for people like us, and my abilities will draw the search team's attention within the first few hours. Yours will likely draw them here even more quickly if you don't get out in time. The first group will be just the nobles looking for a comfortable room to set up their operation, and they shouldn't be looking too hard at anything. They despise having to come down to the floors they manage. Understand?" The patriarch's speech left no room for doubt, so Wolfe could only nod and plan to get out as soon as possible after the travel curfew ended at 5 in the morning. It turned out that Maria wasn't joking about needing to wake up early. The witches turned up at 4:45 in the morning, 15 minutes before the first shift in the mega city's lighting, from full dark to pre-dawn streetlights. As was the custom to greet their noble overlord, the entire main family and their staff were assembled at the front of the house, in a double row down the driveway, with the more important members on the steps of the front porch. I hear a promising candidate from the Noxus family is going to the academy this year. The Countess asked once the basic pleasantries were out of the way. One witch candidate, Cassie Noxus. Uncle Ivan agreed, then gestured for Cassie to step forward. It is good to see another Noxus candidate. But it looks like there is a potential guardian or butler here as well. We have been so lacking in skilled and qualified servants lately that I was starting to fear for the future of the nobility. She replied while staring at Wolfe with a look of motherly affection on her face that was in direct contrast to her description of him as a butler. Wolfe began to panic a little. Despite standing at the back of the group of Noxus elders, he was the first person she greeted after the patriarch. And that was even with the fact that the elder's presence should have disguised any potential that he hadn't been able to hide. And this must be Cassie. She does look rather capable. Better than the last one that came from your territory, anyhow. Got herself pregnant by another student's servant. Can you imagine that? It is good that she didn't have a noble breeding, or the mere allegation would have ruined her family. The Countess snorted in amusement at the thought, and Wolfe noticed Melody disappear back into the house before she could be recognized. By her mother's reaction, Melody hadn't revealed that tidbit about her time at the academy. Wolfe wished her the best of luck. Melody would need it to survive her mother's wrath at making their family name a laughingstock. That is an interesting amulet you have there, Miss Cassie. Would you mind showing it to me? The Countess asked, pointing to the green faux jade trinket around her neck. Cassie reluctantly removed the new talisman from her neck and handed it to the Countess, who held it with a level of reverence and respect that neither Wolfe nor Cassie had been expecting. That is a lovely piece. The materials are cheap, enamel over a wooden disc, but the craftsmanship is impressive. Have you tried charging the amulet? The Countess asked. It has mana stored in it now. It is a wonderful piece, and I was overjoyed when the family elder gave it to me to wear. Cassie confirmed, but the Countess shook her head. No, the amulet itself. This one must be old because the runes are still correct. If you charge it like this, then only someone with the family bloodline can wear or use it. Put it back on and you will see. She explained as she gathered her aura to put a trickle of energy into the carved enamel family crest. The Countess placed it back around Cassie's neck, then motioned another witch forward. The woman suddenly grabbed the amulet, giving it a tug, and her hand instantly turned black before the witch released the amulet with a muttered counter curse that restored color to her flesh. It had to be a serpent type, didn't it? I hate getting poisoned, she complained, returning to her spot in line. While the amulet was impressive, Wolfe was more focused on the Countess and her ability to get another witch to willingly poison herself to make a point. How much influence did you need to have to get to that level of blind obedience? Cassie was holding the amulet with true reverence now. It was the weaker of the two, the one that was intended to be worn openly, but the ability to prevent others from taking it away was exactly what she needed to get through her early days of witch training. Now she would be on somewhat equal footing with the other students, who likely all had a similar treasure. For certain, Melody had left with one, though she didn't return with it, and it wasn't an amulet for gathering mana or anything nearly as precious. Do we need the candidate here anymore? Madame Ashcroft wants to get to the academy early, and I would prefer to send the girl with her instead of by car later. The Countess asked Uncle Ivan. Not at all. Let me send for her bags, and they can leave anytime. The patriarch replied with a polite bow. This year, candidates will not be allowed outside items other than a maximum of 3 magical items. There was an incident last year that made us decide we had been too lenient with the students and that some changes needed to be made to the training procedures. They will be issued uniforms and other necessary items when they arrive. An allowance to purchase all other supplies will be provided for them. The Countess replied, making Wolfe smirk slightly before turning his look back to neutral. Something amusing to you, young man? The matronly witch known as Madame Ashcroft asked from her position off to the side, noticing the change in his expression. How did they take it? Or will you be informing the students when they arrive? Wolfe asked, using a polite tone to hide his impertinent attitude. Informing every student while they were on break was deemed inefficient. Their belongings will be put in storage when they arrive back at the academy. Madame Ashcroft replied, and Wolfe could swear he saw her smile for a moment. Cassie nodded politely to the teacher. Professor, we shouldn't keep you from your travels. Patriarch, Noxus family elders, thank you for your hospitality. She walked over to the large, black armored vehicle where the professor was waiting, and the gathering began to break up, signaling that the formalities were finished. Forgive my haste, but I should also be going, Wolfe added, giving Uncle Ivan a meaningful look that the older man returned with a grim smile. In Ivan's estimation, his best chance at survival was to leave the area and lay low until the fugitive was caught. But since the witches had shown up before the regular folk could freely move about the city and had informed them of their intentions after curfew last night, there wasn't much to do about it in advance. Wolfe went inside, grabbed his backpack and delivery bag, both loaded with what he hoped would be useful items, and hopped on his electric bike, headed for the lower floors and the exit to the city. There weren't many deliveries outside the city walls, but the Patriarch had forged an order from the reagent houses to pick something up from the farm storage compounds just out of sight of the gates. Then Wolfe would either wait there or keep going if it seemed like someone might be looking for him. Cassie thought that the academy would have a car sent to ferry students and teachers, since the compound was out in the wastelands, but what Madame Ashcroft had shown up in was an armored monstrosity of an 8-wheeled personnel carrier. Professor, are we expecting an attack inside the city? Cassie asked as they climbed in, and a pair of armed guards locked the door behind them. I don't know if you are aware, being a member of a crime family, but the city's lower levels are dangerous. Far too dangerous for someone like a noble or a professor to travel through them without a security detail. Then once we leave, we will be in the Badlands, where wild monsters roam. Your friend Wolfe looked like the sort to live up to his name and challenge monsters with no formal training or magical weaponry, but the Badlands are no place for a young lady. Madame Ashcroft informed her in a dry voice. Why bring him up now? At the soonest, I will see him in a year, and if I live up to grandmother's expectations, it could be 4 years, and he could well be married by then. Cassie sighed. Did you perhaps have a thick skin charm cast on you? I don't recall seeing a candidate so dense in living memory. Or perhaps it is simply sheltered and naive. The Countess identified him as a potential Magi descendant the moment we arrived, and according to my tracking spell, he is currently trying to flee the city. I will capture him and bring him with us to the academy, where I will find him a menial job until he has been properly vetted and proven that he is not a threat or a male magic user. It's the safest course for your little lover boy. The professor explained to Cassie, who stared at her in horror. No, he is just a regular guy, not a mythical Magi. If he were, surely grandmother would have noticed. Cassie replied, failing to hide the blush at her memory of being in his arms as he transferred her the mana to make the talismans. Maria Noxus? Yes, she would have been an amazing witch. I do hope that her experience hasn't colored your views on the academy too negatively. Professor Ashcroft said softly. Cassie shook her head, but Professor Ashcroft could see the reluctance to believe that anything but the worst was about to happen to both her and Wolfe if the professor caught him. Things will be different than in the past. The decline in the number of talented witches is affecting everyone, and too many outstanding candidates have been lost to treachery and infighting. Without strong witches, the bloodlines get diluted, and the cities rely on the strongest among us to keep things running. If things keep going that way, it won't be long before the city can't keep everything running. She informed the young candidate. A new witch in the Noxus family is precious, but another tragedy like what happened to Grandma Maria might be enough for them to keep the rest of their daughters home, as those on the lower floors do. Cassie agreed. There are others with promise? The professor asked eagerly. Soon. They are still a few years younger than I am, but grandmother intends to take them in and prepare them for the academy when it is time. Cassie told her with a smile. Good. Despite her misgivings about the academy, she is an excellent teacher. I met her when I first started teaching at the academy and scouting for future talents. She ran the elementary school on your floor and did an incredible job with the students under her care. That was news to Cassie, but it sounded like the sort of thing Maria would enjoy. The male fugitive is right ahead. Should we intercept? The driver asked. No, just grab him once I finish. Professor Ashcroft told the driver, with her eyes glowing green. Wolfe was making great time through the city, and he was only 2 floors from the exit with a now-verified order for reagents from the courier app. With that, he could pass through the exit gates without inspection since the orders were always a priority rush, and they could scan the order from his phone screen as he passed by. His energy seemed to last forever, and he was still holding his rhythm almost 30 minutes into his flat-out race through town. Not even the fastest of traffic was keeping up with him today until he saw a Coven-owned armored vehicle approaching from his right, then turning down the road behind him. Wolfe increased his speed and darted down a side street, but suddenly the world was going black, and he fell asleep mid-stride, flying over the sidewalk and crashing through a plate glass window into a cafe. When he woke up, he was inside the armored carrier, seated next to Cassie, and his bags were in the corner. Good, you're awake. I'm certain that you have a lot of questions, and I'm certain that I don't intend to answer most of them. First off, have you always lived at the Noxus house? One of the bodyguards interrogated him. Unfortunately not, I was just visiting. I grew up with a small business family on a lower floor than the Noxus family. Uncle Ivan adopted me when I was orphaned. Wolfe explained, not seeing a good reason to make this large man beat the easy answers out of him. Did they teach you about the world outside the city, or just how to fight? Your records show you have 13 years of regular attendance at a mixed martial arts gym and a kung fu dojo. The man continued. I have had great combat training, but not much about the ways of the outside world. They really don't matter to someone like me. Wolfe's answer seemed to please the armed guards in the vehicle for some reason. That wasn't the response he expected. It was possible that one of them was the professor's familiar in disguise, or perhaps they worked for the academy. Either way, they weren't upset with the answer. Wolfe had expected that they would be much more concerned since they clearly suspected that he was a magic user, and he had just confirmed that he knew how to fight. But they didn't seem to care at all about the threat. How does your sword work? Almost all of the witch's servants train in fencing from childhood, but most have never been in a fight until they arrive at the academy and go wild trying to get exiled, since they can't accept that they don't have noble status anymore. If Wolfe understood that right, the men sent to assist the witches were stripped of their noble ranks on arrival. Now that was a new bit of information to Wolfe. Or perhaps it was temporary, and their ranks were worthless inside the academy? He could see that causing a riot among the pampered sons of the nobles. I am good with a knife, but swords aren't used on the lower floors. Can I shoot them instead? Wolfe joked, starting to understand what they planned for him now that he was captured and his bid to escape the city had failed. Servant duty, protecting the compound against monster attacks. Or at least that was the only logical punishment in his mind, given their line of questioning. If they found out he could use magic, which they probably already had, he would face life as a closely monitored servant of the academy or perhaps one of the witches that live there. Possibly Professor Ashcroft herself. I hope you mean with a sling and not a firearm, which is definitely illegal in both the city and the academy. But these friendly gentlemen will join the staff to prevent the fights and violence that have previously marred the academy's reputation. That is why I came to collect Miss Cassie, so that she could be aware of the new rules in advance and not get involved in any pointless endeavors, like running off into the wilderness in the middle of a courier order. Professor Ashcroft informed them. She means that even if the students are rude, their fellow candidates are not supposed to beat them too badly or try to cripple their training. I don't think we need to worry much about Miss Cassie now that we've met her, and most of the witches prefer snark and bullying, but I can see there being trouble when a few of the worst among them find out about the new rules. Reporting and stopping such incidents will be part of your job duties, Wolfe. The guard clarified. He was going to be a security guard inside the academy? That was not what Wolfe had expected at all. Did the professor perhaps have a soft spot for Magi? Or was it because she regretted what had happened to Elder Maria and saw a chance to make some sort of amends to the Noxus family? "Professor, we are reaching the exit to the city now," the driver called out, bringing everyone's attention to the windows. The thickly armored gates of the mega city stood open in front of them, and for the first time in their 18 years, Wolfe and Cassie saw natural sunlight with their own eyes. The guard popped open the top hatch to let the light into the vehicle, and Cassie immediately stuck her head out the opening. "Grandmother wasn't teasing me. It really is warm. You can feel it on your skin," she called back into the personnel carrier. "I'm glad you enjoy it, but always have someone less vulnerable check for safety first. It is one of the first combat lessons we teach in the academy during your second semester," Professor Ashcroft admonished her. "Sorry, Professor. I will keep it in mind," Cassie apologized, pulling her head back in. The carrier trundled slowly along the dirt path for most of an hour while the guards watched carefully out of the windows. Wolfe didn't think that they would meet up with monsters this close to the city. They had only recently passed the last of the farms that surrounded the city walls, but the guards were definitely on edge. "Stopped vehicle ahead," the driver reported, bringing their transport to a halt. Both armed guards, followed very reluctantly by Wolfe, who the professor shoved out, exited through the top hatch and moved forward to check out the obstruction. "We have the flanks. Check the vehicle interior," the guard ordered, and Wolfe jogged forward, on alert for any signs of motion. He didn't know what shapes the wilderness monsters could take, but a poisonous snake wasn't out of the question. The area looked clear, and all of the armored windows were broken on the SUV. It had at least one flat tire and a lot of body damage. Whatever did that was not human. The body panels had deep gouges in the steel in a four-clawed pattern. But the shattered remains of the windows were slightly melted, and they were blown outward, not in, as they would be by an external attack. Checking the roof, the top window was broken inward, and the interior was burned out, with 3 visible bodies scorched beyond easy recognition. The monster attack that destroyed the vehicle's body was secondary. The roof was breached, and a thermal charge was detonated inside. Possibly a grenade. 3 confirmed casualties, identity unknown. Wolfe reported with his best impression of a professional while trying not to gag. He had seen some stuff on the lower floors, but not like that. "As long as I don't vomit, I can keep my dignity intact," he told himself, moving away from the vehicle. "Wait on the roof of the transport. It might have been magical," one of the guards instructed, pointing back at the personnel carrier. Wolfe hadn't considered that it might be a magical attack since witches didn't really come to the levels that he lived on. But why would they be attacking each other out here in the middle of nowhere? Could this have been the work of some surviving magic-using mutants who were living in the wilderness? The only spell in the surviving Magi records the Noxus family had was a fire circle, and it was from the introduction to the textbook, so it should have been one of the most basic skills in the distant past. The 2 guards took out some sort of measurement device, then shook their heads, not liking what they found or not finding what they wanted. Then they took photos of the damage and made a phone call to someone. Wolfe considered running, but with that large gun mounted on top of the vehicle, he wouldn't make it very far if they took offense. Not to mention that there was still a witch inside who seemed to be going easy on him for the time being. When they got back, it was clear the 2 men weren't going to give away many details, but the more talkative of the pair leaned over to whisper to him. "You were right the first time. Non-magical, brute force through the roof followed by an incendiary device. Some monsters can use fire magic, but they didn't do that." The disturbed looks made more sense now. It would have been less alarming if it had been just monsters. When the vehicle started moving again, it traveled noticeably faster than it had been moving along before. Cassie seemed not to notice the difference, just happily looking out the window at the grassland and scattered stands of trees, but everyone else seemed a bit more nervous. They all had the same question on their minds. Who was in the burned-out vehicle and who launched that attack? After 2 more hours of travel, they came across another vehicle. Only this one wasn't alone or destroyed. All of the vehicles in the group were heavily damaged, though. "Hold at a distance. That convoy has also turned into the final path to the academy, so we should all be headed to the same place," They have been attacked, and we don't want to alarm them before we can make contact. Professor Ashcroft instructed the driver. Don't the cars all have radios? Wolfe asked, certain that he had seen them featured in every single Wasteland survival-themed movie he had watched. Ours does. All the vehicles that staff use do, and they're never turned off. But anyone else is free to prepare their own transportation. Many among the younger generation see them as outdated and a security risk, since they can be located when you broadcast. So if those are students' family vehicles, they might not have them. The professor explained. What class do you teach, Professor? You seem to have a pretty wide variety of knowledge. Cassie asked. I teach potions from the first year through graduation. Only for Class A, though. The other classes rotate between teachers. She explained. So Class A is a special one? For the children of upper nobility, I am guessing. Cassie replied, a bit sad that this laid-back professor wouldn't be her teacher. Sure, she apprehended Wolfe, but she hadn't done anything to harm him, at least not after he crashed his bike through a storefront. She had even had her team collect it, and the slightly damaged cycle was in the rack on the back of their transport vehicle. Close. It is special, but we don't separate students by parentage, at least not officially. The initial sorting is done by potential, as measured by our staff, then after that, the students are grouped by progress. Cassie looked confused, but Wolfe nodded happily, as this was how his school had done things. The smartest kids were put in the best classes with the best teachers. The rest got to fight over used textbooks and the few chairs and desks that survived the previous year, so that the losers and slackers don't drag down the best and brightest. If my guess is right, school-supplied resources will also be reduced with performance, and if you don't meet the minimum, you're expelled at the end of the semester. Wolfe told Cassie to clarify the situation. For the first year, resources are the same for all students outside Class A. From the second year onward, they are scaled. For example, during the second year, those who don't meet the standards for nobility are separated from the more talented witches. They can take the third year as a remedial class to try to make the lower nobility or drop out during the second year and still be commoner witches. But only the nobility can attend the fourth year and the placement exams. Professor Ashcroft added. The final year placement exams determine your rank and where you get settled. Nobles get territory, but it's not automatically inherited, so you might be placed in a different city or village under the Morgana Coven as a successor to an aging noble without an heir that has passed the academy. Or you could even be given the option to reclaim wilderness land. A few even choose to return home as landless ladies. The professor continued once she recalled that they likely didn't know much of anything about how the senior years of the academy, or the nobility, worked. How are the entry tests ranked? Cassie asked. Melody had gotten the lowest possible score, as she couldn't cast a spell to save her life, but to Cassie, the ranking mattered. Spell power and casting time, measured by a magical device. Magical aids like your talisman are allowed, but outside assistants, like the young Magi here, are not. Doubling your mana draw rate with his help would be too much like cheating, especially when talismans are allowed. Professor Ashcroft explained. That was incredibly biased toward the wealthy families, but Cassie had a big smile on her face. The professor had acknowledged Wolfe was a Magi, and she didn't sound like she wanted to kill him. In Cassie's mind, that was a good start. You can measure any spell, right? It doesn't have to be something specific. She asked, and the professor nodded, wondering where she was going with this line of thought. You can use a spell, or you can simply have your aura tested. Both are fine, depending on your skill level, but demonstrating an actual spell is the only way to get into the top class. Everyone who qualifies for Class A will have at least that much talent. Professor Ashcroft explained. Wolfe, can you carve this symbol into something for me? Your writing is better. She asked, handing Wolfe a piece of paper. It wasn't a circle, but a string of runes written vertically. Proper witch magic, not something that adapted elemental magic to their needs. Just looking at it made Wolfe's skin crawl a little, but it would be easy enough to carve if he had a stick to carve it in. Can we stop for a second? I need a stick to do this. Wolfe asked, but the professor had come prepared and removed a thin wooden branch, bark and all, from her handbag for Wolfe to work with. You have 30 minutes if you are going to make a wand. Since Wolfe probably doesn't know, a wand enhances a witch's innate magic, so it is only usable by the one who created it. We usually have new students make one in the second semester once they have all learned the technique to stabilize their aura, which allows them to cast innate magic. The stronger the aura, the stronger the witch. You will learn to recognize it in your training. The guard told Wolfe with a smirk. Knowing how Cassie responded to his touch and mana flow, Wolfe suspected that this so-called training might be a particularly exhilarating one for both him and the witches. There is more to it, but we will save that for the academy. With your credentials, you will be busy from the moment that you arrive. Just don't let any favorable treatment cause you to forget your predicament. The guard told him. A predicament was a rather kind word for it. Though the professor and the guard seemed more than happy to bring him on as a security staff worker, Wolfe was well aware that male magic users were usually killed if they were caught in the city. Their attitude did give him some hope that things might be different out here in the wilderness, though, since they seemed to be adamant that all skilled fighters and witches were needed for whatever it was that they were doing beyond training. Wolfe carved the nauseating runes into the stick with careful precision, then looked it over, realizing that it wasn't right or complete. The incantation was correct, but the wand needed something else. The runes weren't a language he knew, but once they were carved, they made sense to him, thanks to the inheritance. Wolfe read the text in his head, "I draw the power around me," and thought about the movies. The main characters always repeated a chant for emphasis. Carving it more than once shouldn't hurt anything, and the teacher would probably let him get a new stick if he messed it up. She seemed to like Cassie quite a bit. With 3 copies written, Wolfe was struggling not to throw the wand away just from the feeling of wrongness and revulsion, but he carefully handed it back to Cassie, who giggled happily and began filling in the runes using a gold paint marker. It was also a bit rose-colored, and he suspected that the little witch had put the remainder of his blood in it that she hadn't used in the silver pen. He would have to be careful about allowing anyone to gain possession of his blood in the future, so others didn't find out. When she finished, the talkative guard offered her a talisman, much like the mana storage one she was wearing. "Since it's carved by the Noxus family, for the Noxus family, I think it's only right if our talisman completes the process," she told him, then placed her free hand on Wolfe's bare arm. The man gave Wolfe a sly wink, suggesting that he knew there was something between Wolfe and Cassie, but didn't say anything. The wand began to glow black, with purple sparks flickering in the darkness, before the spell completed and something around Cassie changed. The darkness lingered, not as a physical thing, but more of a sense of power, one that Wolfe had come to associate with Professor Ashcroft and witches in general. "Oh, not bad at all. Did your grandmother teach you that?" the professor asked, and Cassie nodded happily. "But since I couldn't use magic before this week after my birthday, there was so much to do that all I had time to learn was the theories, preparing me for the academy." She said that in her day, the test was done naked to ensure there was no cheating. The professor laughed out loud at Cassie's blushing face. "We haven't done it that way in nearly 50 years. 20 years ago, they began allowing magical devices since everyone would be using them in class anyhow. I was as disappointed as you when I found out that nudity was no longer a requirement." The guard whispered to Wolfe, taking a smack from the professor for his comment. "And that's why we changed it. The tests are done in front of the whole school. You are free to work naked if you prefer. I doubt any of the young ladies would object, but I will warn you, the academy is air-conditioned," she informed Wolfe with a straight face. That meant that shirtless was an option, even if it wasn't the best idea since any witch who touched his bare skin would know he had an affinity for magic. Plus, he was still hiding the extent of his abilities, even though he was captured. If whoever they sent to judge him thought he was like the other elders and relatively harmless, they might let him go with a less severe punishment. But who could have guessed that strategic nudity was actually an approved tactic to help keep the young witches in line? Once Cassie was holding the wand and her aura became noticeable, it seemed to stabilize and soon blended into her presence, as if it was always part of her. Her hand was still on Wolfe's arm, though, and he could feel something between them, not a flow of mana, at least not directly, but it did feel like the contact was helping to balance them out. The professor noticed the continued contract. You catch on quickly. Yes, she can use your power to increase her own. It's a matter of compatibility, though. Even if you have an affinity for mana, as many of the Noxus men do, how well a witch can manipulate it makes all the difference in how much power is shared. How well she can manipulate it. For a moment, Wolfe almost forgot that a man who could manipulate magic was so taboo that they hadn't considered his abilities in the equation. But it also meant that since he could, he would be able to work with a witch's aura to strengthen himself, and that they were going to teach him how to do it, but not intentionally. When their personnel carrier arrived at the academy, the first thing that Wolfe noticed was how empty the place was since they had arrived nearly 2 days early. The second was the amount of damage to some of the vehicles that were in the parking lot. Clearly, not everyone had the easy journey that they did through the wastelands. The moment they stepped out of the vehicle with Professor Ashcroft and the guards, a wave of gossip started swirling through the assembled students. The crowd was almost what Wolfe had dreamed of, young ladies everywhere, in the iconic school uniform no less, and above the knee-length short-sleeved dress with long robes over the top, both in black with either silver or gold trim and badges to mark what class they were assigned to. However, he noticed that a long skirt and blouse with a cardigan were also a uniform option. What he didn't see was any familiars. He had expected to see them wherever there were witches. Rats and cats and newts, or even demonic imps. The movies wouldn't lie to him, and Wolfe was looking forward to seeing all of the small creatures. The familiars are hiding in the school waiting for their witches. They don't need to be very close for the witch to benefit, like in the movies. These are just the new students and the ones who wanted to get a head start on putting the newbies in their place. The guard whispered to Wolfe, guessing what he was thinking. That made sense. Most of the older witches likely didn't care about the newbies at this point. Before the tests, they didn't even know which ones were a threat and which were easy targets. Professor Ashcroft turned to them with what Wolfe recognized as her teacher's face, a stern and blank expression of mild disapproval that she hadn't worn before this moment. Since we are here and there are no bags to put away, Miss Cassie, I will get your paperwork finished and lead you to your dorm. Wolfe, I believe you will be busy for a few minutes, but the guards will show you to your room. Her attitude toward Cassie was suspiciously kind, much different than the Countess had been, and it had only increased after the creation of the wand. If Wolfe didn't know better, he would say that the teacher had chosen a new favorite student. Once the teacher was gone, Wolfe expected the students' attitudes to change, but they still seemed cautious around the two guards, and Wolfe realized a bit too late that there hadn't been just one teacher in the personnel carrier. There were some fearful mutters about the hell that was combat class, exchanged in hushed whispers that Wolfe could still clearly hear after the improvements that gathering mana had made to his body. So, I am guessing one of you is the combat instructor? Wolfe asked. Both, actually. We teach the elite classes here at the academy, and there are 4 more at the training compound a few kilometers away for the soldiers and squires doing their year-long application. The guard chuckled. You are bringing this commoner straight to the academy? Even if he's one of yours, he will still need to take the servant's exam. A nasal male voice complained from somewhere in the crowd, disdain for the instructor clear in his tone. Wolfe Noxus, meet Luke Abilene, the butler to the Abilene daughters and a dueling champion all through his youth. Luke, please step forward if you wish to challenge the judgment of the academy. It is the right of the high noble houses to challenge staff appointments in the academy. The instructor ordered, rolling his eyes in annoyance with the rule. Contrary to his voice, Luke was an outstanding specimen of manhood. 190 centimeters tall, lithe but muscular, clean-cut, and with a face Wolfe would almost call pretty. In short, he hated him the moment he saw him. Do you have a training weapon handy, or should we bring some? The instructor asked. Someone handed Luke a 2-handed wooden sword, and the tall man smirked at Wolfe, who was clearly a commoner and would have no sword skills. Every courier carried weapons, but none of Wolfe's were training weapons, and they were all tucked away in his bags, so he turned to the instructor for a sparring weapon. Do you have a baton or rattan sticks with you? That shouldn't cause any more damage than a training sword. The quiet instructor took a collapsible baton from his belt and tossed it to Wolfe, who extended it with a flip of his wrist. Not his preferred weapon in a street brawl, but it was an easy-to-use one. His opponent was a sword-fighting champion, but Wolfe was sure that Pretty Face had never seen a real fight, at least nothing like the street kids of the lower levels fought. The fight is until concession or until I call it. No groin attacks, no biting or poking of the eyes. Fighters, are you ready? The instructor asked. Luke took a fighting stance with his sword tipped down and his knees crouched but parallel. Wolfe took this as a sign that he would be taking advantage of his reach to try to dominate the fight without getting hit. Wolfe stripped off his shirt so it couldn't be grabbed and took a crouched stance, holding his baton in front of him like a dagger. His opponent looked at him with the same disdain he had spoken to the instructor, and Wolfe nodded his readiness. Begin. Luke stepped forward and swung his sword high, but Wolfe went low, not swinging the baton but tackling his opponent. Luke hit the ground with a solid thud, his sword sliding to the edge of the circle of students, and Wolfe immediately laid into the side of his head with the baton. He hadn't expected it to feel so good to get a chance to beat the pretentiousness out of a noble brat who had been demoted to a servant. But it did. It felt really good, in a way that Wolfe was a bit ashamed to admit. He got 3 solid hits in before Luke got both hands under his chest and threw Wolfe away, much harder than Wolfe had expected a human to be able to. That was one of the advantages of being a servant to a noble family. He had a strength amulet with him. Luke took a martial arts stance and motioned Wolfe forward, ignoring the blood streaming down from his temple and his nose. The baton was a liability in a grappling fight, so Wolfe discarded it and smirked at the battered face of the pretty boy. "You will pay for that," Luke growled, his voice no longer nasal and annoying. "I did you a favor. You sound better this way," Wolfe quipped before dodging a flurry of fists. Luke was fast now that he had discarded that oversized sword. He must have chosen it expecting to humiliate an unskilled rookie. Wolfe's strikes were all blocked, but Luke wasn't quite fast enough to catch Wolfe in return. To the students, it looked like a stalemate until Wolfe's foot appeared to slip on the grass. Sliding step, a technique from the kung fu master at his local fighting gym, looked like a trip, but was actually the start of a spinning kick. Luke stepped forward to tackle his opponent and return the favor of a broken nose, only to find Wolfe spinning away before a sharp pain made the back of his head pound, and the world went blurry. Wolfe pulled Luke's shirt over his head after kicking him, trapping his arms above his shoulders and blinding him before following it up with more punches to the face until the young noble finally got out of his shirt entirely. He roared and charged Wolfe, who tried for a headlock, taking them both to the ground again. "Break it up. He's proven he has the qualifications," the instructor called, pulling them apart just as a spell flew into the arena, knocking Wolfe to his knees. "Krista, you know that attacking during a duel is prohibited, even if your twin brother is losing." Someone in the crowd laughed. A small blonde witch ran into the ring, hugging the battered form of Luke Abilene before feeding him a healing potion and glaring at Wolfe. "Anyone who dares to give this commoner healing will answer to me," she insisted, making many of the students flinch back. By her aura, she was no stronger than Cassie, so it must be her family influence scaring them, Wolfe decided. "I appreciate the thought, miss, but I will be fine with a little rest. Most of this blood isn't mine," Wolfe told her in his most polite business tone, finely tuned for dealing with rude customers who didn't want to sign for packages. From what Wolfe had learned on the way over today, the students didn't get to keep their own servants at school this year, and Luke had been introduced as a servant of her family, not the academy. He likely wouldn't have to see him again, though Krista might be an issue in the future. She looked really mad about the broken nose, though her potion had set back to its original perfection. The twins stormed away, nursing their wounded pride, leaving the audience in shock. "Look, he has a family tattoo. Do you think one is the houses is trying to circumvent the new rules and bring in their own servant?" a girl whispered. "Maybe, but it wasn't House Abilene, even though their older daughter is here as well." Another one snickered, then quickly silenced as a tall blonde woman glared at her. She looked at Wolfe with a mixture of curiosity and longing, but quickly looked away to talk to someone in the crowd. Wolfe grabbed his shirt and covered up before any of the witches could come up with an excuse to touch his bare skin and give him away. The action made a number of the first-year girls boo him, but they had their show, and they would find other men to drool over, he was certain. You wouldn't want a servant like that. He's a brute and a gangster from the lower floors. I mean, just look at what he did to Luke Abilene's beautiful face. What sort of monster would want to destroy that perfection? Wolfe heard a few second-year girls telling their friends. You should write a book. How to meet witches and make friends. The instructor laughed, breaking the tension in the area and then guiding Wolfe away to the staff dorms, or perhaps it was a prison compound since the windows had bars on them. That could be a precaution against monster attacks as well, though, and once they were inside, Wolfe realized that the building was every bit as luxurious as the Noxus family home. The academy didn't seem too concerned with him attempting to run away or damage the property, that was for sure. Don't worry, with skills like that, most of them will overlook you damaging the boy idol's face. His kind finishes their training, goes home to their parents, then brags about their skills and how far they could have gone in life if only they didn't leave the military to accept an arranged marriage for their noble family's sake. Wolfe knew the type, spending their lives riding on one moment of faded glory. The lower levels had their fair share, though they were usually drunk and divorced, not wealthy sons of noble houses. Here you are. Change into the uniform. It's mandatory inside the school, as Professor Ashcroft told you on the way in. You've got a whole day off, so learn the layout and meet some people. There is a map in your academy-provided supplies. The instructor left, and Wolfe headed for the small shower in his room. He had Luke's blood all over him, and he was sweaty from a hard fight and a day's travel, hardly a fit state to go looking for ladies or witches as the case may be. The black pants and silver shirt with a black vest that marked the employees of the academy looked good on him, like they were made to match his black hair and gray eyes. It was a shame it was a servant's uniform. Wolfe was rather fond of it, and he would happily wear it all the time. He was about to head out to find some food when an insistent knock sounded at his door. If it was that idiot Luke looking for revenge, Wolfe was going to beat the stupid out of him right in the hallway. "How might I help you?" he asked through the closed door. "School Council President Kara wishes to speak with you." A male voice answered politely. Wolfe opened the door and found himself in front of an incredibly curvy ginger-haired witch with glowing green eyes and a suspicious look on her face. Behind her stood a butler, dressed identically to Wolfe, but with a sword on his hip, presumably the one who had knocked. "You are the one that defeated the dueling champion of the Abilene family? You don't look like much. But there are proprieties to be followed. I am Kara, the Student Council President, and I welcome you to the Academy. There have already been requests from the staff to meet you for a personal assistant interview, so I must ask, what are you looking for in a partner?" "Is this a dating service?" were the first words through Wolfe's mind, and he could see the man whom he presumed to be the president's guardian hiding his amusement at her choice of words. "I was under the impression that I would be at the academy for an extended period of time, under their supervision, so I don't know how to answer that," Wolfe replied. Kara nodded, then made a few notes in her day planner. "I will have them rearrange your duties. Having you on security detail around campus would cause many unnecessary problems, as well as distractions for the students. In the mornings, you will be either on duty or training in combat and etiquette. In the afternoons, you will be the practical training volunteer for first year, Class A. Most of the first-year students do not have familiars to assist their casting at the moment, and with the servants banished after last year's incident, the teachers are all looking for talented replacements to be their teachers' assistants. Becoming a magical punching bag isn't the most glamorous of jobs, but the teachers will cast armor spells on you, so there is really no risk of actual injury, unlike your brawl this morning. He had heard a lot about this big incident and the changes it brought to the academy. It must have been bad, but it didn't seem to be a secret. What exactly was the incident? "That sort of news doesn't make it to my ears back in the city," Wolfe asked. It was the butler who answered. The first years were on a field trip, and from what we could determine, a jealous servant had placed a curse in the bag of a student who had rejected her advances. But it went off early and burned out the bus, killing over 20 candidates. Then the accusations started, with curses thrown, attacks on sleeping witches accused of being the guilty ones, and finally, One desperate first-year candidate getting herself pregnant to try to claim a position in a noble house through the family's younger son who had been sent here as a servant. It was a huge mess all around, and it was determined that for the time being, it would be wise to prohibit all servants from the ground and eliminate all intermingling between the witches and the squires training nearby at the military academy. Senior class applications have been down for a long time, but they're terrible this year. None of the nobles wanted to send their daughters back to the academy after the break. And the commoners who failed out are telling horror stories on the lowest levels of the city where we get most of our less talented recruitment from. From what I have heard, they are even forging documents so that when the academy comes to pick up those who have been identified as potentially talented, the recruiters will believe that they are still underage for the academy and, therefore, ineligible to be enrolled for this semester. Wolfe just stared at the man as the story progressed. What a public relations nightmare for the school, especially since it sounded like a lot of witches were severely injured in the aftermath as well. Missing servants could be replaced by staff or by having the candidates do things for themselves, but if the witches didn't want to return to the academy and build their power and status, it would be a tragedy both for the coven and for the city. The butler raised an eyebrow at Wolfe, silently asking if he was finished with his off-topic questions and ready to meet with the staff that wanted him as their teacher's assistant. "All right, would you be so kind as to lead the way to the cafeteria? I should meet everyone and get something to eat now that I'm in uniform." The cafeteria, he learned, was not one single place. It was split into 4 different locations, divided by class, but not by year so that the witches with similar potential could mingle. Class A had a much smaller room than the others they passed, as they had the smallest numbers, but it had the same diner-style bench seating as the other cafeterias. That was where the student council president led him. "You can eat anywhere you are welcome, or the staff room is next door. Go there if they start getting pretentious. You work for the headmistress, not them. We will introduce you to the teachers later, but do keep in mind that they will be watching your interactions at all times through the cameras." The large man accompanying the student council president informed him. That was a relief. Being subordinate to an entire school full of snobby rich girls his own age would be too much, and he just might risk the consequences of heading into the woods to try his luck at freedom. "President came through for us." "Thank you, President Kara." "Did you ask him?" "I've got to know." One of the witches wearing a second-year badge asked. Wolfe and the president's personal butler, who also seemed to be her guardian and assistant, stood back as the president was swarmed by eager witches, wanting to know if they had a chance at regaining their domestic help. "Have you ever been in a Mercy's store for the 80% off, one-day-only sale on Halloween?" the big man asked. "I feel a bit like the last handbag on the top shelf," Wolfe replied, referring to the designer magical storage bags and purses that the store was famous for. The students aren't allowed to actually sign an employment contract with the staff members anymore due to the school rules, but in the past, the administration would respect a claim and transfer the employee once both parties agreed. "I am not sure that's going to be an option for you, though, given your circumstance. The ones that offer sex in exchange for your assistance are going to be tempting, but they will almost always be the ones that fail out and remain as commoners. The course load is incredibly heavy for second years, even without unneeded distractions. If the witch is demoted, the academy will break the contract, and the servant can go home or look for another witch next year since most commoners can't afford domestic help." The butler subtly gestured to a representative of the various groups he was speaking of while he elaborated on the various groups of students from the viewpoint of a staff member. "Then there is the Sapphic group. They are cute, but they're mostly into each other. Don't bother with them. They go for the submissive sort to pamper themselves and their lover like a slave. No dignity at all in that option if you ask me. The tomboy faction is where it's at. Lots of talent in that group, and they can handle a little rough play. What's not to like about that? Last up are the bookworms. If you like those, you might have to ask them, but they usually graduate into decent positions and don't go for power. That might be the sort of life you are after if they let you leave here when the investigation is done." His explanation covered almost all the groups of witches in Class A, and Wolfe wondered how exactly they could still be planning to get a servant since they couldn't bring any in. "Let's eat." They will be discussing the order that they make their try for the new staff for a while. We only work 8 hours a day, so unless you work evenings, that leaves 8 hours for them to make their play. Or so they think. The headmistress will set them straight tomorrow, but they might still want a piece of you. I'm Merc, by the way. I forget that not everyone knows. Wolfe Noxus. But you already knew that. With everyone talking, there was no line for food, and they soon had plates of some sort of casserole and salad that Wolfe couldn't identify, along with a couple of sandwiches each, packaged to go. A trick Merc said prevented midnight hunger. Grab a table along the edge. It is quieter, and that's where the good choices are. See, the blue-haired tomboy and a freshman hottie together. Merc suggested. Clearly, dating wasn't prohibited, at least not in Merc's mind. Do you think they're from the same house? Wolfe asked, not seeing who Merc meant through the crowd. Probably not. The witches get roommates in the first and second years, so the newbies learn the ropes and get their work done. It's part of their class work to do group projects with their roommate. Merc explained. A few seconds later, Wolfe spotted them. A tomboy with a powder blue pixie cut, wearing a gray tunic-style shirt from the staff uniform instead of the witch's blouse or cardigan with her skirt, was sitting next to Cassie. Come on, Merc. Let's make friends. Wolfe winked. Cassie was sitting in the corner by the wall with her new friend across from her. Wolfe led the way and sat down next to Cassie, moving his salad to her tray, which only had a partially eaten sandwich on it. What would Grandma Maria think if she saw you starving yourself? Relax and eat. Wolfe told her before turning to her friend. I'm Wolfe Noxus. Pleased to meet you. She's not. Wait, do you know him, Cassie? The small, blue-haired witch asked. The excitement was making her eyes flow and flicker with a light that matched her hair. Wolfe hadn't seen that sort of eyes until the last few days, but the jewel-colored shining eyes that identified a powerful, or at least capable, which were truly mesmerizing. We met before I came to the academy. He is the one who helped me make my wand. Cassie explained. Hey Merc, good to see you again. This little cutie is Cassie Noxus, and she's already stabilized her aura before she even made it to a single class. Have your girlfriend look out for her, would you? The other girl asked. Wolfe Noxus. Meet Ella Mariel, the exceedingly violent daughter of a mechanic in the middle floors and my childhood friend. Merc introduced them. This is Wolfe? Oh, girl, you've got it bad. He's built like a bike courier. I'll bet he can go all night long. Ella whispered to Cassie, not realizing Wolfe could hear her. The blush on Cassie's face when she realized that Ella's whisper had been loud enough for not only Wolfe, but Merc and the witches at the table behind her to hear was so deep that her face almost matched the violet of her eyes. You get used to her. She never did have a filter. Merc assured the blushing witch, but she was too mortified to notice anything that was happening around her at the moment. Though he had gloves on, Wolfe double-checked that he didn't have any mana stored in his body, just in case his ability to mask his powers wasn't as good as he thought, and reached out to shake Ella's hand. It is a pleasure to meet you, Miss Ella Mariel. Merc speaks very highly of you. I have heard good things about you as well, Wolfe Noxus. I hear your handwriting is impeccable and your stomach is strong enough to carve an entire aura wand, she said with a smile, taking his gloved hand in both of hers. Her nails matched her hair and eyes. She had gone all out on the preparation for the first day of her academy training. At least as much as was possible when they couldn't bring anything with them anyhow. There were more than a few cases of bedhead going around among witches who hadn't gotten around to unpacking the provided supplies to find the hairbrush. So it's not just me that feels an aversion to those runes? But I appreciate the compliment on the handwriting. Bike couriers need to be able to write well to address parcels. Wolfe replied. As they were talking, more of the senior students began to file in, every one of them in a bad mood about the prohibition on personal effects and servants occurring at the same time. Well, I need to go. The boss hates waiting. I suggest you all head back to your rooms fairly soon. The seniors are not happy about the new rules, and they're likely going to take it out on anyone they can. Cassie looks a bit shy, and that makes her an easy target, even with Wolfe here, unless he's going to write incident reports all night. Merc told them, getting up to join the student council president in calming down the seniors. Why don't I walk you home, ladies? It would be a shame if anything happened to you. Wolfe suggested. Such a gentleman. Maybe we won't have to swallow our disgust to work with the teacher's assistants this year. I heard many horror stories from the customers at my dad's shop who had attended the academy in the past. Ella smirked, leading Wolfe and Cassie out before anyone could notice that they were leaving in a group. Wolfe and Cassie talked about Elder Maria and how Cassie was going to crush the entrance exams with her new wand while they walked. You're an odd one, Wolfe Noxus. The staff that are sent from the noble houses usually only talk about duty and honor and the privilege to serve the witches. Ella told him very seriously. Is that what they're selling these days? I'm all about education. So, how about I walk you home from class today and tomorrow? I can help you both with your homework. As I've said before, my handwriting is very good. Wolfe suggested. We will see, big boy. After the entrance exams tomorrow, there will be a bit of time to spare before the familiar summoning. Who knows, we might not be a good match. Ella replied with a smirk while Cassie gave her a look that said she was not pleased with her roommate's flirting. Any friend of Cassie's must be a good person, so I am sure we will be an excellent match. But this should be your room. Wolfe told her with his best gentlemanly bow. He would have to work on that if he wanted to impress the witches and make his life easier. The dorm rooms all had biometric locks. Only residents and teachers could open the door, so Wolfe stepped back, letting Ella open up and took Cassie's hand. If you need anything at all, just ask me, even if it is just homework. I'm glad you found a good friend. I will see you tomorrow at the entrance exam, Wolfe told her. I have a plan. I think I will do better than average. Cassie answered, then ran inside the room, closing the door behind her. Making an early move, are you, rookie? Good luck with that. Those two have some potential to them, and the witches of Class A would rather wait for the right noble son than take just anyone. A passing janitor joked. You never know if you never try. Wolfe shrugged, and the janitor waved goodbye as she entered a dorm a few doors down, tools in hand. Wolfe didn't see many people as he headed back to his room since most of them were at the cafeteria, letting the student council know every detail of their feelings about the no personal effects and no servants rules. Wolfe hadn't considered it before since he didn't need much, but with only the contents of his pockets, he was left with only a lighter, a small brush, a pocket knife, a pen, and a cash card with very little in it. His bags and bike were taken to storage by the second combat instructor, the same as everyone else's. The supplies left in the room amounted to basic toiletries and 2 uniforms. That had to be utter torture for the noble witches, whose clothes didn't even have pockets. Hopefully, they were at least allowed a purse when they arrived, but Wolfe hadn't seen any on the ones who had been standing by the gates. After the day he had, Wolfe decided to just settle in to meditate. He needed to work on his mana while he could since he had to keep it empty when it was likely he would be touched. He could successfully mask his power now, but he didn't know or trust the extent of that ability. Perhaps he could test it later, maybe during the witches' classes, when he was on other duties and nobody was around. The academy was sure to have surveillance, though, so he would have to find a good spot and a trustworthy partner before he did anything. Stretching his mana pouch took longer every time he attempted it, and now he could only complete 4 cycles per night. But it was still making good progress. Wolfe took it as a good sign. He already knew he could activate spell circles when it was 1/5 of its current capacity, so surely he would have enough capacity now to do much more impressive magic? If only he had more knowledge about other magic users to compare himself to. When the schedule notification in his room went off just after dawn, informing him that he had no duties for the morning and no formal classes to assist in the afternoon, Wolfe showered and then headed for Cassie's room to escort her to the auditorium for today's entrance and sorting exams. He could already hear the frantic voices inside the various rooms as he passed by, struggling to get ready without any of their own personal supplies. Wolfe wasn't sure if this was cruel and unusual punishment for the nobles or if it was actually a test of resourcefulness and skill. If you knew the trick, you could style hair into something respectable with just about any brush, but that wasn't the usual fashion of the wealthier witches. You could also make a smoky eyeliner from burnt candle wicks, and he had found candles in his room, so the witches should have them as well, but he doubted anyone had thought of that while they were raging about not having any makeup. Of course, Wolfe didn't realize that the candles he found were actually wax sticks for sealing letters, a practice that gave way to text messages hundreds of years ago inside the cities. Wolfe made his way to the supply room on the main floor and picked up a few essential items, hair products and shaving supplies, since the kit provided by the academy hadn't included any. Then made his way to the student dorms and knocked a sharp staccato at Cassie's door, which opened almost instantly to show him a disheveled and panicked-looking Ella. "Oh, it's you. I had hoped it was a teacher to help. What do you want?" The fuzzy blue hair made her look like a mad scientist, so Wolfe brought out the ultimate peace offering. "Hair pomade. You are a miracle worker. Come in before anyone sees." Ella cheered, pulling him through the doorway. Both of the witches were dressed and ready, with Cassie sitting on one of the beds in the palatial room, her wavy brown hair expanding to a ball of fluff and violet eyes shining brightly in joy. Wolfe recalled them glowing before, but they used to be much darker. He was certain of it. Cassie noticed his staring right away. "I normally wear colored contacts, but after yesterday my eyesight improved and I don't need them anymore." Violet eyes were normal here, as well as emerald green, bright blue, and shining gold, so she would fit right in with her classmates, but it was a big change to her appearance. The violet eyes made her look perpetually happy. "Mind if I braid your hair? My mother taught me when I was little after she broke her hand at work and couldn't do it herself." Wolfe asked. "Please do." Cassie cheered, happy not to have to rely on Ella from the very first day, and having already failed her initial attempt to make a braid stay without a hair tie. At home, she had always worn her hair loose, hiding her face, but at the academy, she wanted to make a good first impression. Grandma Maria had told her that it was essential to making friends here since she didn't have a noble family name to earn respect. Wolfe didn't know a lot about braiding hair, but he knew if he started at the front, he could braid it down either side, the way his mom preferred, and then bring them into one braid at the back. Once he finished, he realized that he didn't have any sort of hair tie for the bottom. "Do you have string? A scrap of cloth or something?" he asked hopefully. "We have ribbons in our school supplies." "Will that do?" Ella told him, returning the pomade with a reluctant look. "Ribbon is perfect. If they don't give you your allowance to buy essentials today, I will keep bringing supplies to you in the morning." Wolfe's offer made the normally confident Ella hesitate a little, and that reminded Wolfe of the candle trick the girls of the lower floors did when they couldn't afford makeup. Once Cassie's hair was tied with a violet ribbon to match her eyes, Wolfe lit one of the wax candles, then snuffed it out with his fingers and carefully gave Cassie eyeliner as she reflexively closed her eyes to avoid being poked in them. "What do you think?" "It washes right off if you don't like it," Wolfe asked. "I think you need a lot more practice, but not bad." Ella laughed, taking the lighter from his hand to repeat the process and fix his work. "You really came prepared. Did you know the headmistress wasn't going to let us bring anything?" Ella asked after admiring her handiwork for a moment. "No, guys' clothes have actual useful pockets. Since he's a courier, he must have had the lighter for customers who smoke, and the rest is all stuff every guy should carry," Cassie explained to her rather confused roommate. "No wonder witches keep men around," Ella exclaimed, finally seeing the usefulness of a male human, much to Wolfe's dismay. "Are you ready for the test? I can feel that you were working on your aura last night." Cassie nodded and gave Wolfe a grim look. "It is actually way harder than it seems. On the way here, it happened so naturally, but all last night I struggled to make any progress at all." Ella shook her head at the complaint. "That's just how it is. If you could build aura that fast, who would stay here for 4 years? Most of our class won't even stabilize theirs until it is almost time for the first midterm exams, and some of the candidates in the lower classes never manage it at all." That gave Wolfe an excellent idea. "Would you like to try to recreate the trip and see if it helps? Maybe the problem is your focus," he suggested. Ella looked at him suspiciously, then sat him down on one of the beds. "My Cassie is a pure and innocent soul. If you want to show her things between boys and girls, you clear them with me first." Wolfe smirked at her protective nature. "Fine, both of you sit down here next to me." That's how we were when she stabilized her aura. Now I take my glove off and we link fingers just like this. Now, Cassie, what did you do next? Focus on pulling mana into my aura and fixing it there. That's what Grandma told me to do. Ella looked surprised at the contact of Wolfe's skin on hers, but quickly hid it. What she couldn't hide was the slight moan as she pulled mana through Wolfe. It reminded him that he was an idiot and that he had been wearing gloves and avoiding contact for a very good reason, but in retrospect, some things were worth the risk. Ella was able to pull mana through him every bit as smoothly as Cassie was, building and stabilizing her aura by a tiny but noticeable amount in the few minutes that they had while biting her lip and giving Wolfe intrigued looks when she thought he wasn't watching. Just as he suspected, they were going to be very well matched. "You're going to ignore that, or I am going to hurt you," Ella told him directly, but Wolfe noticed that she didn't let go of his hand. "Ignore what? We should get going, or we will be late and end up either in detention or you two will end up standing in the back somewhere for the entire induction ceremony," Wolfe suggested, helping both witches to their feet before putting his gloves back on. Cassie fell in beside him, taking Wolfe's left hand and swinging it as they walked to the auditorium, drawing curious glances from the older witches and envious glares from the first-year candidates. "Look there. The rest of the students have just finally arrived," Cassie called, pointing out a window with her free hand. 20 buses, accompanied by 6 heavily armed vehicles, had just pulled into the academy compound, and a wave of students was pouring out. They must have convoyed here to avoid meeting whatever fate had befallen the burned-out car that Professor Ashcroft's personnel carrier came across on their way here. Instead of waiting, Ella pulled them to the auditorium and grabbed seats near the foot of the bleachers, right by the door where they could watch the new students come in. "My senior, who was here a few years ago, told me this is the best spot. You guys showed up early, just like I did, but the others still have that clueless new student smell to them, fresh off the bus and adrift in the academy without their servants," Ella explained. She wasn't joking. The look on their faces, combined with the herd movement, as if they were all afraid of getting lost, made them seem somehow more vulnerable and weaker than the students who arrived yesterday. They were ushered by a group of teachers, including Dean, the combat instructor, to the front of the auditorium where they would be the closest for the entrance exams, but also on display for the senior students in the bleachers. Once they were seated, the students who had been watching them arrive filtered in, and a middle-aged witch with shockingly green hair stepped to the podium. "Welcome, everyone, to the academy. As you should already know, I am Headmistress Peach, and I will be overseeing your education for the duration of your stay here. It is customary for the examinations to begin immediately after the introduction of the new servants, but as we have forbidden them this year to help you focus on your coursework and not work on getting pregnant, we have only one new staff member. Wolfe Noxus will be our new hall monitor and the practical skills assistant for first-year Class A." Wolfe stood up and waved to the assembled students as the headmistress finished her speech, then took his seat again when she stepped aside without even bothering to explain the new rules or the reason for them, and Professor Ashcroft took her place. "We will begin our examinations the same way as always, first with an aura scan and then with a potential reading. Ladies, all you need to do is place your hands on the device and do your best to activate it. If you can cast a spell, please do so. It will absorb almost all types of magic at the level that you can muster," Professor Ashcroft instructed the witch candidates. For most, this was an impossible task. Witches couldn't use their powers before adulthood, and they were sent here right afterward, so none of them had more than a year to prepare, with many being shipped off right after their 18th birthday, even if they didn't show signs of having the gift. The headmistress spoke up again after Professor Ashcroft gave the instructions. "First up, we have Krista Abilene. Lady Abilene, please show the new students how it is done, and say hello to your mother for me the next time you talk." If her mother rated highly enough for the headmistress to defer to her this way, maybe Wolfe shouldn't have beaten her brother so badly. Hopefully, he didn't hold a grudge. The pretty blonde witch strode to the podium in her new school uniform and delicately placed her hands on the aura measurement device. Age 19. Pure blood witch. Aura strength 50 units. The device reported. That seemed to be good, going by the look on everyone's faces. Then she stepped to the second device, and a crystal ball turned from clear to jet black when she put her hands on it. Wolfe couldn't tell what sort of magic she was using, but he could feel the flow of mana from her aura into the ball. Potential, rank A. Thank you, Miss Eveline. You may take your place among the Class A group. There were 2 sets of waiting areas for witches. One with padded wooden chairs and a much larger one with long metal benches. It wasn't hard to guess which was which. The examinations went smoothly, passing through the rows of candidates without issues, but the further they went, the more concerned the teachers seemed to be. They were in the last of 12 rows of floor seats, and only 8 of the 20 Class A seats were filled. That was giving hope to the remaining students, who had heard rumors and gossip from their older relatives that the top 20 of them would be joining Class A, the same as most other years. But one after another, they failed to make the cut. Even the haughty daughters of high nobility, which should have a powerful bloodline, failed and were assessed rank B and even rank C potential, despite being among the few who could activate the aura machine. Finally, the floor seats were empty, and the headmistress looked into the bleachers straight at Cassie and Ella. Ella Mariel, you're next. Dear best. Professor Ashcroft called to them. Age 18. Mixed blood witch. Aura strength 41 units. Potential rank A. That made her second in the class for strength so far, and only the 9th rank A potential for the year. Our final witch candidate is Cassie Noxus. Perhaps the crime families of the middle floors can show us a bit of potential that the others have squandered in search of wealth and fame. The headmistress asked the room. Oh, she was big mad. Wolfe was surprised that she hadn't set anyone on fire or stormed out of the room yet. Just the fact that they only had 10 witches out of hundreds that could actually make the cut for Class A was enough to very nearly put her into a rage. From her words, it was clear that she blamed the situation on political marriages diluting the witches' bloodlines, since marriage to someone with purely mundane human or a mixed Magi lineage would do them no good in their efforts to rebuild their strength. In their pure form, neither of those bloodlines produced women who could use magic. Cassie quickly made her way to the exam station and placed her hand on the aura tester, with the other hand up her sleeve, holding her wand. Age 18. Mixed blood witch. Aura strength 147 units. The room was stunned to silence, and Professor Ashcroft lifted Cassie's sleeve to show the room that the heirloom she had brought was an aura wand, which would naturally increase her score for that portion of the exam. The professor didn't say anything about her having made it on the way here, though. The score was also almost 3 times the next candidate's, putting her at a huge advantage over her classmates. She stepped to the second machine and placed her hand on it gently, smiling at her small victory over the snobby nobles. Potential rank A. The room breathed a sigh of relief. Yes, she had a very strong aura, but she wasn't some rank S wonder child who would draw more attention than she was comfortable with. I see the Noxus family didn't disappoint us. I knew one day your family would rise up. After all, I went to the academy with your grandmother for all 4 years. The headmistress informed the shocked crowd. The nobles had never heard of House Noxus before, which meant that despite making it to graduation, something had happened that prevented Cassie's grandmother from becoming a noble. That helped their pride a little. They could now say she was of noble birth but a fallen house without a title. That indirectly meant that Wolfe was likely also one, as they assumed the two were brother and sister or possibly cousins from their close interactions on the way into the auditorium. This led to the question of how he managed to get a job here, when the academy turned down all of their house's attempts to embed servants for their children. That made a total of 10 students in Year 1 Class A, half as many as expected, and half as many as had returned from Class A for Years 2 and 3. There were also a lot more failures to activate the aura device than Wolfe had expected, and he wondered what the first-year dropout rate was. He knew a lot of candidates failed, but unless a lot of witches also got their aura working and got themselves on track to building a strong foundation, this was going to be a very small graduating class. If the first-year Class A students will please follow your instructors out, we will begin class announcements for the remainder of the student body. The headmistress announced, bringing the small elite group, totaling only 10 women, to their feet. I will see you this afternoon. Save me a seat. Wolfe whispered to Cassie, then gave her an encouraging thumbs up as she moved to follow Instructor Dean out of the auditorium. Merc, the student council president's assistant, motioned for Wolfe to follow him out of the room as well. He expected to be led to a classroom, but instead, they went to a storage room with guards on duty at the entrance. State your name, and you will receive your allotted additional personal items, training weapons and armor based on your fighting style and duty rotation. The storage room guard informed them. Anything I should know before picking out personal items? Wolfe asked. Yes, a simple hex from a second year which candidate hurts just as bad as any weapon, even if it doesn't leave a mark. Pain tolerance is an essential skill of all employees. Merc told him, and the men on guard duty nodded, having been cursed by witches more than once before. More than once that day, in fact, since they weren't allowed to dispense anything to the students before the assembly. And that was one of many reasons why Wolfe didn't want to stay here forever. Too much drama and danger. Now, head back to your room, sort your new clothes and toiletries, then meet the ladies of first-year Class A after lunch. They're not holding a proper class, but it will be good to meet them all, as well as the practical magic teacher that you will be working under. I will also warn you hygiene is far more important than you think. Get used to washing multiple times a day during training unless you want to be ridiculed and isolated by the witches. The more powerful they get, the more sensitive their noses become. Merc instructed. He should have warned him not to pick products with strong scents, Wolfe thought, but the big man was very much a live and let die sort of person. It wouldn't be an issue for Wolfe anyhow. With the increased sensitivity of his own nose, strong scents were already excluded from his list. Wolfe had carefully picked products with a mild scent, except a cologne in a dropper bottle that reminded him of the smell of the forest they drove through. It seemed to be natural and didn't bother his sensitive nose, so it should be fine for the witches. The academy might have banned personal items from outside, but they weren't stingy with the supplies that they provided. That was going to kill Wolfe's plan to woo the ladies with his domestic skills, though. He still picked out some violet ribbon and blue nail polish, just in case. It was getting close to lunch, so Wolfe rushed off to his room with the large sack of items as soon as he had them all picked and was certain that he didn't miss anything. While checking them out of storage, he learned that they weren't just generous with the items available. They were also giving the students and employees both a generous monthly allowance that their purchases were subtracted from. For Wolfe, it was on top of a pitiful salary, but that was still better than nothing. His purchases were relatively inexpensive, but many of the ladies' products were not, and certain items, like weapons and perfume, were horrifically expensive. Very sneaky. You could buy anything you wanted, but the items everyone wanted would leave you penniless in a hurry. The variety of deadly weapons told him that there would be practical work involved in this, which training as well. If there weren't, the school wouldn't need to sell so many blades, sharpeners, and equipment care kits. What Wolfe did notice was a conspicuous lack of armor. There was a selection for the staff, assigned if their duties were likely to require it, but it looked like the students would be expected to protect themselves with magic. The pair of batons they gave him for hall monitor duty were very sturdy alloy, both light and slightly flexible to avoid cracking with repeated use, so he wouldn't need another weapon for a while unless he wanted a good knife. Not that he could see himself using a baton, much less a combat knife, against any of the girls in the academy anytime soon. Hall monitor duty couldn't be that dangerous. There were only a few people in the Class A cafeteria when he arrived, all from the senior classes, but his appearance and choice of fighting style, indicated by the batons on his hip, seemed to gain him some approval. Wolfe chose a lunch set and a pack of gum, then took the same seat as he found Ella and Cassie at yesterday. I told you he was a gentleman of culture. Wolfe heard one of the witches laugh. Wait, there's a chance he didn't know he picked a seat in their section yet. Wait until the rest of the returning witches get here. Another one insisted. So it was a trial, what group the new arrivals would pick and where they would fit in during their time at the academy. For now, this area was mostly empty, but a lot more students were coming in. Wolfe realized that it would have been easier on him if he had picked the staff cafeteria today, but he hadn't thought of that and had just returned by instinct to the last place he had eaten. There was some unspoken rule that today, The wall seats were for selected second-year witches and freshman students. Almost every wall seat was empty, but at least one seat at every other table was taken. Ella and Cassie came in with a group of 4 other girls, one of which was wearing a long coat with runes on it and carrying a bat on her shoulder, while the others walked behind her. A female gang leader and a witch rolled into one person? Wolfe's little brother approved. They got their food, and the high nobles at the far side of the room stared at them in disgust while they walked straight to the table Wolfe was at. "Move. There's no room for you," the leader insisted. "You can sit in my lap if you like," Wolfe told her with a wink, and the girls stopped whatever she was going to say next to gape at him in shock. Ella was trying really hard not to laugh as her new friend tested him, and Wolfe noticed a bookish freshman girl panicking at the way being blocked by the confrontation. Nobody seemed to notice her, though, so she was stuck with a loaded tray, clearly meant for multiple people. "Can we let the traffic through? You can tell me all about your favorite bat, how potions class is going, and why you wear shorts under your skirt, but she looks like she's going to collapse if we don't let her by," Wolfe said, standing up and putting his hand under the loaded tray. "He's not bad, Ella. Better than usual, and he even smells decent." The leader finally relented, then motioned to a girl who was standing by the door and moved to an interior table while the others joined Wolfe in the corner. "She's going to make you pay for the joke about having shorts on under her skirt later. You know that, right?" Ella laughed. "I am Candy, this is Asia, and finally, we have Jody. The one with the borrowed bat from the sports room is Risa, a 4th-year senior we can go to for advice. So, what can you tell me about the cafeteria? It looks like the cliques are easy to guess, but how's the food?" Wolfe asked. "Usually good, but sometimes it gets ruined." The one called Risa answered from her seat across the aisle while glaring with deep hatred at a group of girls that had come over. Now, is that any way to be looking at your dear classmates? I just wanted to say hello to our new pet. Is that so wrong? I'm Rochelle. If you need anything at all, I am always available." Even the densest of young men couldn't miss those implications. Well, that's one way to get stronger genes in your family. But if you prefer a witch who can actually read, you are also welcome to join us. The book club meets every Tuesday. A taller blonde witch cut in. Wolfe didn't get a chance to catch her name since her words immediately started an argument with Rochelle that turned from words to hexes in only seconds before Wolfe had to get up and help the other staff in the room break up the fight. "This school is wild. I totally didn't see that coming from the book club." Wolfe laughed as the two were dragged away by the security officers that were assigned lunch duty for the Class A mess hall. "We're not all bad. She just doesn't like Rochelle," someone called from across the room, proving that they were all listening. The rest of the freshmen were beginning to come in now, and the real show was about to start. For most first-year students, picking a group to become friendly with on your very first lunch break would be a challenge. Impressing the second-year witches enough to be welcomed to a table so they didn't have to eat at the filthy table of shame in the corner until someone gave them a chance. For others, it was easy. The high noble daughters among the first years were practically drowning in offers. When your family can ruin theirs with little more than a wave of their hand, everyone wants to be your friend, at least to your face.